LoveLore Library. Chapter 111. When Lianxingjie saw that Pang Xiao was about to attack him again, he screamed in fear and quickly rolled on the ground, narrowly avoiding the knife again. It was unknown whether Pang Xiao's knife was intentional or not, but it cut into the long narrow table. More than half of the knife went in, but the long narrow table was intact. He tried to pull it out, but it didn't come out. He simply grabbed Lianxingjie's collar with his bare hands and punched him. Lianxingjie screamed in pain. He covered his bruised eye with one hand and grabbed Pang Xiao's wrist with the other. He shouted, "Pang Zhishi, how dare you hit an official of the imperial court? I will definitely impeach you, impeach you. If you're a man, then fight back. You only know how to complain." He punched him in the stomach again. "I won't give you the chance to impeach me." Lianxingjie clutched his stomach and tried to resist, but he was suppressed again. "I will definitely impeach you. I will make you lose your official position." "As you wish." Pang Xiao pressed Lianxingjie to the ground and punched him. Everyone finally recovered from Pang Xiao's words of "my woman." Jing Pei rushed forward in a panic and pulled Pang Xiao's arm. She said anxiously, "Little Wang Yi, you're too impulsive. He's the commander-in-chief after all." Pang Xiao kicked him again. "That's exactly what I'm going to beat up." Qin Yining stared blankly at Pang Xiao. His mind was already in a mess. No wonder this person's courtesy name was Zhishi. It turned out that he was Pang Zhishi. She always felt that this person wasn't simple. Sure enough, he was the little Wang Yi who made people tremble in fear and killed people without hesitation. Why did he go to the capital of the Dian? What was his relationship with Fairy Lu? She remembered that the emperor was still eating the elixirs that Fairy Lu had given him. Pang Xiao's father died because of a plot to drive a wedge between them. He should hate family Qin to the bone, but why did he help her save her time and time again? If he had ulterior motives, why didn't she feel any hostility from him? Pang Xiao turned around and flicked his finger. He raised his eyebrows and smiled at Qin Yining. His eyes seemed to be saying, "How was it? Did I enjoy beating him up?" Qin Yining blushed, but he didn't know how to react. Pang Xiao's attitude towards her seemed to be the same as before, but she didn't know how to face him. Lianxingjie covered his bruised right eye and struggled to get up. Jing Pei hurriedly supported him, but Lianxingjie pushed him away. "Pang Zhishi, you have an affair with the daughter of the Grand Preceptor of the Yan dynasty. You clearly intend to commit treason. Which eye of yours saw this king having an affair with anyone? You clearly said that just now. This king fell in love at first sight. You're twisting words and forcing logic. This king beat you up, but this king took a liking to Miss Qin. If you can produce evidence of this king's treason to gain your majesty's trust, then do as you please. However, you have to try and see if you can survive." Pang Xiao spat out these words and turned to leave. Before he left the tent, he stopped and turned around to look at Qin Huayuan and Qin Yining. Qin Huayuan's eyes were calm as he looked back at Pang Xiao with an unreadable expression. Pang Xiao didn't look at him. He only gave Qin Yining a crooked smile before he lifted the curtain and walked out in high spirits. Qin Yining's heart pounded at his smile, and he couldn't help but hide behind Qin Huayuan. Qin Huayuan frowned as he looked at Lianxingjie's bruised nose and swollen face. Jing Pei let out a long sigh. He glared at Qin Huayuan and then at Qin Yining. He stomped his feet and said, "You're really a disaster, a disaster." Then he flicked his sleeves and left. The tent, which had been noisy just now quieted down. The only sound that could be heard was Lianxingjie's pained cries. The contents of the peace talks had yet to be decided, but Lianxingjie was beaten black and blue. Qin Huayuan and Cui Wenqing didn't know what to do. Lian Xingjie crawled up and walked out with the help of his deputy. Cui Wenqing chased after him and said, "Lord Lian, our peace talks, what's there to talk about? Can't you see that my lord is seriously injured? You have no sincerity at all, yet you still have the nerve to ask." The deputy reprimanded, then carefully helped Lian Xingjie away. Cui Wenqing turned around and said anxiously, "Grand Preceptor Qin, what should we do? Don't be impatient. Things like peace talks can't be concluded in a day. There has to be a period of time for discussion. Let's stay here for the time being and observe the situation. It won't be too late to discuss it tomorrow." Seeing Qin Huayuan so calm, Cui Wenqing also felt reassured. Thinking about the farce just now, she couldn't help but curse in a low voice, "The people of Dezhou are really crafty. I heard that Pang Zhishi lost his position as marshal because he was unruly. The emperor of Zhou arranged for Lian Xingjie to take his place. Pang Zhishi has been suppressing his anger for a long time and even left a few days ago. Today, he used our presence as an excuse to take revenge on Lian Xingjie. Yet he shamelessly implicated Miss Qin and tarnished her reputation. He really is abominable." Qin Huayuan sighed and said, "What can we do when we're under inferior eaves? Lord Cui, why don't we settle down for today? We'll see how things go tomorrow." "Lord Cui is right. Let's settle down for today." Qin Huayuan, Cui Wenqing, and Qin Yining left the main tent and headed to their own territory on the east side of the camp. After bidding farewell to Cui Wenqing, Qin Huayuan and Qin Yining entered the tent and arranged for people to stand guard 1 zhang away from the tent. "Father, I didn't expect him to be Pang Zhishi. I didn't know about it before." Qin Yining lowered his voice and sounded anxious. Qin Huayuan waved his hand and interrupted Qin Yining's explanation. He smiled and said, "I know. It's not your fault. But he was the one who messed up today's matter. Sister Yi." Qin Huayuan smiled and patted her head. "Actually, I'm not angry at him for barging in and messing up the situation. In fact, I'm very grateful to him." When Qin Yining heard this, tears welled up in her eyes. She thought back to how Lian Xingjie flirted with her as if no one else was present. He actually treated her as a fangirl for his amusement. Furthermore, he did it in front of her father and other strange men. If she was truly a chaste woman raised in a boudoir, she would have hanged herself long ago to prove her innocence. However, at this critical juncture, her father still did his best to protect her. "Father, I'm very touched that you're willing to protect me. However, we can't disobey the Emperor's orders. Today's peace talks didn't succeed, so we have to report this to the Emperor. If the Emperor really blames you, you won't be able to explain yourself if he says that you don't care about the country and can't even bear to part with your daughter and disregard the country's safety. Next time, if that Lian Xingjie does this again, you should give up on your daughter." Qin Huayuan knew that Qin Yining was right. However, his only daughter looked so much like him when he was young. Her temperament and personality were so lovable. How could Qin Huayuan bear to part with her? "Father will definitely think of another way. Sister Yi, don't worry." Qin Yining suddenly raised her head and looked at Qin Huayuan with teary eyes. Being stared at by her sparkling eyes, Qin Huayuan's heart almost melted into a puddle of water. His large hand gently patted her forehead again. "Father's greatest regret in this life is that you didn't grow up by my side. We've only met for a short time, but we've spent more time apart than together." Qin Yining's smile was so big that she squeezed out the tears in her eyes. Qin Huayuan used his sleeve to wipe her face. "Silly girl, what are you crying for? If you grew up by father's side and received father's meticulous training, you would definitely be more outstanding than ordinary men. We have no choice but to obey the emperor's orders. The emperor ordered father to bring you along, so father brought you along. However, if the people of Dezhou don't want to, we can't forcefully send them over, right? How can the emperor blame us? Qin Yining's eyes widened. She quickly understood Qin Huayuan's meaning. Father, are you saying that Peng Zhishi caused a ruckus today because of this? He beat up that person surnamed Lian until he was seriously injured, and that person surnamed Lian couldn't do it himself, so he doesn't blame you or me. I'm afraid that's what Peng Zhishi meant. Qin Huayuan narrowed his eyes. His gaze was deep and serene as he said, I can't see through him. When I first met him, I felt that he was unfathomable. Now, it seems that he has an extraordinary background. His actions are unreasonable, but he has his reasons. It's said that on the battlefield, he's full of tricks and tricks. He often does unexpected things, making it impossible for people to guard against him. In their imperial court, he doesn't follow the rules. Some people say that he's an upright man who can't be subdued by force, while others say that he's a devil incarnate who dares to make a scene in court. In any case, there are all kinds of rumors about him. Even the emperor of Dezhou can't do anything to him. This is the first time I've met him, and I really can't figure out what he's trying to do. After listening to his father's description, Qin Yining thought about how Pang Xiao never stopped teasing her when they were together. However, she couldn't really hate him, and she gained a deeper understanding of this person's unfathomable depths. Forget it. You're tired today. Go back and settle down. There are men everywhere in this military camp, so you have to be careful. Yes. Your daughter will take her leave. Qin Yining bowed and left. A Yen soldier led the way to his tent. Because the entire military camp was filled with men, it was inconvenient for them to live together. Qin Yining's tent was built on the north side of the Dayan camp with a wooden fence separating them. There was a large tent in the middle of the wooden fence, and it seemed to be isolated from the rest of the world. 2 soldiers were left to stand guard on this side of the fence. When Qin Yining returned to his tent, he didn't light the lamp. He first washed and changed his clothes. Then, he stuffed a dagger that he had hidden on his body when he left Xihua City under his pillow and went to sleep with his clothes on. In the next few days, the peace talks entered a state of anxiety. After Lian Xingjie was beaten up by Pang Xiao, he claimed that he was sick and couldn't get up. Because Lian Xingjie was the official in charge of the peace talks in Dezhou, if he didn't appear to sign or use his seal, then it was useless for others to say anything. For the first 2 days, the Dayan people were still able to keep their cool. On the 3rd day, imperial edicts continuously came from the capital. Xihua City wasn't far from the capital. The emperor's imperial edicts came one after another. Basically, every 2 hours, Qin Huayuan would receive an imperial edict that angrily rebuked Qin Huayuan for his incompetence. The contents of the imperial edicts were the same. They scolded Qin Huayuan for being incompetent. He had brought his daughter, but he wasn't willing to hand her over. If he was willing to hand over his daughter, the peace talks would have been successful a long time ago. Could it be that Qin Huayuan wasn't willing to hand over his daughter and was disloyal to Dayan? Although Qin Yining lived alone, she couldn't help but worry about her father when she heard the eunuchs outside delivering edicts every 2 hours and reprimanding Qin Huayuan to the point that he was beaten black and blue. It seemed that the emperor was really anxious and scared. Otherwise, he wouldn't have disregarded manpower and material resources. He was so anxious that he didn't even care about his face. It had been 7 days since they arrived at the peace talks camp. Lian Xingjie still closed his door and claimed to be ill. He refused to sign or use his seal. And tonight, Qin Huayuan received an unprecedented amount of rebuke. The emperor even cursed Qin Huayuan in the imperial edict as a wretched man, a lowly slave. Qin Yining understood what Lianxingjie was doing. It was nothing more than waiting for them to take the initiative to hand over their daughter. That way, he could regain the face he had lost that day. In the past few days, his father indeed hadn't taken the initiative to hand her over. How could she continue to hide under her father's protection? Would she really not cause his death? Qin Yining thought to this point. He suddenly sat up and looked at the sky outside. The sky was already dark. It was past noon. She gritted her teeth and made up her mind. She hid the dagger under her pillow in her sleeve pocket. She straightened her hair and put on the jade cloak with the white fox fur collar. She went out the door and headed straight for the Dezhou people's tent across the open space. Chapter 112. The banners fluttered loudly in the night wind. On the Tiger Army's flag, the ferocious tiger head with golden embroidery revealed its sharp fangs under the illumination of the torches. Qin Yining wrapped her cloak tightly around herself, her long hair fluttering behind her head. She passed through the empty square and headed straight for the luxurious tent in the middle of the opposite camp. She had investigated beforehand and found out that the Lianxingjie was the commander-in-chief and had the highest status in the army. Therefore, he lived in the most luxurious tent. Not only did he hate work and was greedy for pleasure, but he also wanted a beautiful woman to accompany him every night. At this time, most of the ordinary soldiers were already asleep. Only the soldiers on patrol and sentry duty were still on duty. Therefore, the luxurious tent in the middle of the camp was the only place with a light. The Tiger Army on sentry duty had already noticed Qin Yining's figure. She was wearing a jade-colored cloak that shimmered faintly under the night sky. It made her fair face look as flawless as jade. All the rats in the army were male. Since there was a woman, and such a beautiful woman at that, they naturally feasted their eyes on her. Therefore, the soldiers on sentry duty didn't stop Qin Yining when they saw her. They only cared about admiring her beauty. Qin Yining felt several gazes on her. She felt as if there were needles all over her body and the hair on her back stood on end. However, she couldn't shrink back. She couldn't be afraid. She couldn't let her father lose his life in order to protect her. While she was thinking, she was already standing outside the tent. Through the bright light, she could see the shadows of the furnishings in the tent. The two Tiger Army soldiers on sentry duty looked at each other in dismay. For a moment, they were hesitant. Such a delicate beauty standing outside the tent in the middle of the night. It was obvious that she was throwing herself at them. Should they not stop her? Or should they not stop her? Or should they not stop her? The two soldiers exchanged a knowing look and didn't say anything. Qin Yining's face turned red. She pursed her red lips and said, "This little girl from the Qin clan requests an audience with Sir." The tent was completely silent. Just as Qin Yining was sweating nervously and awkwardly, she heard a voice say, "Come in." Qin Yining tightened his grip on the dagger in his sleeve and calmed himself down. Then, he slowly stepped forward and lifted the curtain to enter. The two Tiger Army soldiers standing guard looked at each other again and smiled tacitly. 4 silk lamps were burning in the tent. On the left side of the tent, there was a long table with books, maps, and other things neatly arranged on it. Behind the table was a chair. Behind the chair was a sword hanging on the wall of the tent. The right side of the room was covered with a red carpet, and a screen was placed in the middle. On the outside, there was a military bed with neatly folded bedding. There seemed to be a lamp on the other side of the screen, casting the outline of a bathtub on the screen. There was a figure in the bathtub, and it was obvious that the figure was taking a bath. The sound of water splashing could be heard, and Qin Yining saw the figure's arm splashing water. Qin Yining's face immediately turned red. No matter how strong she was still an unmarried girl. Whenever she thought of Lian Xingjie's old and fat body, she felt goosebumps all over her body and nausea churned in her stomach. It seemed that no matter how clear she was when she came, she couldn't remain completely indifferent when she was truly faced with it. Qin Yining bowed and said, "This humble girl from the Qin clan greets your excellency." A low and hoarse male voice came from the other end. He spoke slowly, "Miss Qin, didn't you dislike this official that day? Today, you came in the middle of the night. Aren't you afraid that this official will eat you up?" These words were so explicit that Qin Yining was both embarrassed and angry. However, she couldn't do anything about it. She could only say in a low voice, "Your Excellency is a sensible person. You should know why this humble girl is here today." "Oh. Then tell me, what is your purpose?" When Qin Yining heard the other party's frivolous tone, she wanted nothing more than to stab him to death with a knife. However, without this person's seal, the peace talks couldn't be carried out. She knew she could only say, "If your excellency is willing to put your seal on the negotiated agreement, this humble girl will naturally fulfill your excellency's request." Haha, this humble girl, you actually know what it means to be loyal to the country. You're actually willing to sacrifice yourself for that incapable ruler of yours. Qin Yining didn't want to pay attention to Lian Xingjie's mockery. She slowly tightened her grip on the dagger in her hand and said, "Does your excellency agree? If I don't agree, what do you plan to do?" The sound of water splashing could be heard. Qin Yining saw a man's figure reflected on the screen. She was so embarrassed that she quickly lowered her head. Then, she heard the rustling of clothes. Following that, she keenly felt a presumptuous gaze fall on her body. An unfamiliar man's aura was getting closer and closer. She lowered her gaze and saw a pair of large bare feet. The muscles and bones on the insteps of those feet were protruding. It was obvious that they were very strong. Qin Yining tightened her grip on the dagger and couldn't help but take a step back. Unexpectedly, in the next instant, she was wrapped around by a pair of iron arms and firmly pressed into a fiery embrace. She suddenly raised her head and was faced with Pang Zhao's handsome face. His long hair was tied up in a bun. When the water dripped from the bun onto the thin snow-white cloth on his shoulder, a piece of cloth became transparent. Qin Yining's hands pressed hard against his warm chest. She could even feel the soft yet firm muscles under her palms and the strong beating of his heart under his muscles. "Why is it you?" Qin Yining's eyes widened. "If it's not me, do you want it to be Lian Xingjie?" "I'm not. I'm here to. Are you here to throw yourself into Lian Xingjie's arms? Or?" He suddenly grabbed her wrist with one of his large hands. With a skillful move, the dagger in her sleeve fell into his hand. Her body turned in another direction. His large hand firmly grasped her slender waist and her back was pressed against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder and smelled the fragrance of her neck and neck. He murmured, "Or are you here to assassinate me?" Qin Yining didn't expect that the one living in the main tent was not Lian Xingjie. It was the first time for her to be so close to a man. Her brain was about to turn into a pot of paste. She just struggled hard. "Let me go." "No." "Pang Zhishi, let me go." "No. I won't let you go." "What?" "You can serve Lian Xingjie, but you can't give me a hug." "You pervert." "I'm a pervert." "You took the initiative to offer yourself, and you blame me for being a pervert." Pang Zhao did not know why he was so angry. His low voice was filled with suppressed anger. His big hand held her waist tightly, and he breathed in the sweet scent of a young girl on her body. He wished he could break her neck with one hand. He didn't dare to imagine what this arrogant girl would have experienced if he didn't kick Lian Xingjie out of the tent and take the main tent for himself. "Tell me, if you met Lian Xingjie today, what would you do? Would you offer yourself to him or assassinate him?" It's none of your business. Let me go. Qin Yining felt that the person behind her couldn't hide his anger and killing intent. She was alarmed. Her hair stood on end because of her instinctive fear. She used all her strength to struggle. She felt that if she didn't escape, this person would probably strangle her to death. Qin Yining was very strong, but she met Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao felt that her extraordinary strength was because she hated him so much. He couldn't help but be angry. He used a lot of strength to restrain himself from hurting her, but she didn't feel it at all. You stupid woman who doesn't know what's good for her. Pang Xiao squeezed the words out of his teeth. He held her shoulders and forced her to turn around. He pressed her against him and leaned over to bite her red lips. At first, he did want to bite her, but he was intoxicated by her soft and sweet touch. He couldn't bear to bite her even if he wanted to, so he changed from biting to sucking. His big palm pressed the back of her head and the other hand pinched her chin, forcing her to open her cherry lips so that he could violate her. Qin Yining only heard a bang in her head. Her whole body froze. He dared to kiss her. That day in the tent, he domineeringly said, "My woman," without caring about her feelings. She could barely explain that he was helping her and Qin Huaiyuan out of trouble, so that the Emperor of Dezhou wouldn't misunderstand that Qin Huaiyuan didn't want to give her to the Lianxingjie. But what was this now? This person hid his identity and stayed by her side. He saved her life and befriended her. She treated him as a friend and treated him sincerely. She even wanted to repay him for saving her life. But now he took the opportunity to molest her. Qin Yining's tears welled up in her eyes. She began to struggle with her hands and feet. She whimpered like a small animal. Pang Xiao's anger had long been extinguished by this kiss. Her current appearance was soft and obedient. In his eyes, she was like an angry little bunny. He couldn't help but want to hug and coax her. He moved his lips away and kissed her forehead domineeringly, making a sound. "Okay, don't make trouble. Be good. Who do you think you are? How can you do this?" Qin Yining covered her mouth and rubbed her forehead with the back of her hand. Tears fell down. "Who do I think I am?" Pang Xiao's anger that had just disappeared reignited. He scolded with a cold face, "I am your man. Who do you think I am? You would rather sleep with that bastard Lianxingjie than with me, right? Go away. I don't want to see you." Qin Yining pushed him away forcefully and ran away when he wasn't paying attention. Pang Xiao was stunned by her words, "I don't want to see you." He heard the sound of something breaking. He was angry and wronged. All kinds of feelings mixed together and finally turned into unspeakable bitterness. He took 2 deep breaths and chased after her. "Stop right there!" Pang Xiao roared. The tiger army outside the tent was stunned when they saw Qin Yining run away. Did she not succeed in throwing herself into his arms? Or was their family's Wang Yi abandoned? Who knew that Pang Xiao would chase after her barefooted in his underwear? When he roared, the tiger army became alert. The patrolling tiger army immediately took out their weapons and chased after him. The Dayan soldiers across the camp also heard Pang Xiao's voice. When they saw the tiger army rushing over with their weapons, they thought that the Dezhou people were going to go back on their word and attack the camp. They all panicked. "Get up, take out your weapons. The Dezhou people are attacking the camp." Qin Huaiyuan and Cui Wenqing quickly put on their clothes and ran out. At the same time, the soldiers of Great Yan drew their weapons and rushed forward, standing in a standoff with the pursuing tiger army. Qin Yining ran to Qin Huaiyuan's side. When he saw his daughter's tear-stained face, Qin Huaiyuan's heart skipped a beat. He quickly grabbed Qin Yining and said, "Sister Yi, are you okay?" Pang Xiao cursed in his mind, "Stupid woman," then strode over to them. He was wearing only an inner garment, which was half opened and exposed his firm muscles. He stood barefoot in front of the brave tiger army, then pointed his finger at the great Yan's army and said with a loud voice. Chapter 113. The scene was silent. The tiger army, who originally thought that something big had happened, now completely understood. It turned out that Wang Yi had taken a fancy to a woman. Wang Yi was indeed not an ordinary person. He was so ruthless even when it came to getting a woman. The tiger army, who had always been in awe of Pang Shao, craned their necks to look at her curiously and playfully. They wanted to see what kind of beauty could move Wang Yi and make him declare his ownership of her with such fanfare. The Dayan people's faces were all ashen. Everyone felt that the emperor's action of asking Grand Preceptor Qin to present his daughter was shameless. Now that Qin Yining was being humiliated in front of his face, it was simply a slap to their faces. The Dezhou soldiers were full of fighting spirit. They clenched their weapons tightly and cursed endlessly. When the tiger army saw the other party's reaction, they also calmed down and prepared for battle. The atmosphere was tense at the slightest touch. Pang Shao glared fiercely at Qin Yining and waved her hand, "Retreat." The tiger army was well trained. When they heard the military order, they neatly put away their weapons and retreated in unison. Pang Shao casually returned to her tent barefooted in her underwear. Seeing the other party retreat, the Dayan people all breathed a sigh of relief. After all, the tiger army's combat ability was not only reflected in the commander-in-chief's command and formations, but also in their individual combat ability. Because of the difference in the region and the difference in the daily training, an ordinary soldier of Tiger Troop could defeat 5 of the best soldiers of Great Yan. The gap between them was so huge that it made people feel helpless. Qin Huaiyuan said, "Everyone, go back and guard your positions carefully." Yes. The soldiers retreated. Cui Wenqing looked at Qin Yining, whose tears had not dried yet, and then looked at Qin Huaiyuan, whose brows were tightly knitted. She sighed and turned to go back to her tent. After all, it was humiliating to give one's only legitimate daughter to another man. Cui Wenqing didn't want to ask Qin Huaiyuan what was going on. However, she didn't expect the other party's son, little Wang Yi, to be so interested in Qin Yining. After thinking about it, Cui Wenqing still reported the truth in the secret report sent to Jingde that night. Grand Preceptor Qin had already sent his legitimate daughter to Lian, but Lian was indifferent. Prince Zhongshuan publicly expressed his love for her. When this secret report reached the capital, the emperor was wild with joy. He was so happy that he could not sleep at night. Little Wang Yi was a war god with a high position and authority. He was Emperor Zhou's sworn brother. If he could get rid of this person, the situation might turn around. Immediately, the emperor fell into a dilemma. He couldn't help but beat his chest and stamp his feet for his mistake. If he had known earlier that little Wang Yi liked Grand Preceptor Qin's daughter, he would have chosen another beautiful woman to bring to the Lianxingjie. If each of them had one, both of them would be satisfied. Neither of them would want to steal the others and hurt their relationship. If the two of them fought over a woman, it would be bad. The emperor thought about it again and then issued another edict. He ordered someone to send it to Xihua City at the fastest speed possible. Therefore, at noon the next day, Qin Huaiyuan received the emperor's latest edict. Act according to circumstances. It is important to win the peace talks first. In other words, he would give Qin Yining to whoever could win the peace talks. After Qin Huaiyuan ordered the eunuch to deliver the edict, he smiled faintly at Cui Wenqing. Cui Wenqing felt guilty and helpless. He had followed the edict. In addition to the peace talks, his mission was to monitor Qin Huaiyuan. After all, the emperor was afraid that Qin Huaiyuan would hold a grudge against Qin Huaiyuan and become disloyal to Dayan. He had no choice but to send secret reports every day. Grand Preceptor Qin, the other party is biding their time. Should we add fuel to the fire? This matter has been delayed for a long time. This official is afraid that the emperor will be anxious. If the emperor was anxious, he could do anything. If the peace talks didn't succeed this time, the emperor might not care about the people's opinions and directly kill their entire families to vent his anger. Qin Huaiyuan naturally understood Cui Wenqing's difficulties and concerns. Let's observe them for one more day. If they still don't succeed, we'll relax the conditions tomorrow. Cui Wenqing nodded. In fact, he had always been very conflicted. When he was negotiating with Qin Huaiyuan, he firmly believed that he had to fight for the greatest benefits for the Dayan people. Because they couldn't agree on the conditions and Lianxingjie deliberately refused to show up, the peace talks had reached a deadlock. However, he understood that the emperor probably didn't care about how much money and cities they offered. As long as the other party agreed to stop fighting, the emperor would happily give them a promotion. With such an emperor, Cui Wenqing didn't know if he should cry for himself. At this time, Qin Yining was resting in his tent. She hadn't slept all night. As soon as she closed her eyes, she would think about what had happened last night. Pang Zhao's passionate embrace, domineering kiss, angry roar, gentle coaxing, and his declaration in front of everyone, "Sooner or later, you'll be mine." These scenes were like different colors of paint that mixed together in her mind, forming a dazzling whirlpool. She didn't understand why Pang Zhao was like this. She was used to analyzing the pros and cons, but when faced with her own problem, her mind was in a mess. For Pang Zhao, she had no value at all. Why would Pang Zhao take the initiative to approach her, get to know her, befriend her, save her life, and save her from Lianxingjie twice? She didn't want to be so narcissistic as to say that Pang Zhao liked her. But since she had no value, why would he do this? After all, her father was the enemy who had killed Pang Zhao's father. Qin Yining really couldn't understand why he would do this when facing the daughter of his enemy. However, she had to admit that she was glad at this time. Fortunately, she went to the wrong tent and it wasn't Lianxingjie inside. Even if she was kissed by Pang Zhao, it was better than giving herself to Lianxingjie. When she thought of that kiss, the inexperienced her face burned with embarrassment. She turned over and buried her burning red face into the pillow. Although her father didn't ask anything last night, with his intelligence, he definitely knew what she was doing on the other side. There were some things that were inconvenient for father and daughter to say, but they had a tacit understanding. Her plan had failed. She didn't even see the shadow of Lianxingjie. But what about the peace talks? Miss Qin. At this time, a soldier's voice came from outside the tent. That soldier's voice was filled with joy. Miss Qin, Grand Preceptor Qin asks you to immediately go to the command tent. The other side has taken the initiative to negotiate with us. Little Wang Yi said that you must be present. Qin Yining immediately sat up when she heard this. She was stunned for a moment before saying, "I'll go immediately." The other side took the initiative to negotiate. She didn't hear wrong, right? Qin Yining didn't have time to think too much. She tidied her hair, put on a cloak, and went straight to the command tent. As soon as she entered, she saw the bruised and gloomy Lianxingjie talking to Qin Huaiyuan about something. Pang Zhao, who was wearing a black battle robe, was accompanied by Huzi, who was wearing a bodyguard's uniform. They were hugging a snow-white little rabbit and squatting to the side as they spoke in a low voice. Cui Wenqing awkwardly squatted beside Pang Zhao. Her expression was very stiff. Qin Yining was a bit surprised. A dignified Prince Zhongshuan was actually hugging a little rabbit in the middle of a serious peace talk in a military camp. Qin Yining couldn't help but mock, "Little Wang Yi, are you pretending to be Chang Yi?" Chapter 114. Pang Shao was originally in a very good mood with the little rabbit in his arms, but who knew that Qin Yining would come in and throw a barrage of sarcasm at him. Pang Xiao's face darkened, and he stood up with the rabbit in his arms. Here. Take it. Qin Yining was very surprised, and his gaze fell on the little rabbit. The little white rabbit was different from a normal rabbit. Its body was slightly chubbier, its cheeks were puffy, and its ears were drooping to the sides. Its entire body was only the size of a palm, and its entire body was covered in snow-white fur. Only its left eye had a dark circle, and it looked indescribably funny. When the tall Pang Shao brought such a small rabbit in front of him, Qin Yining almost couldn't hold back his smile. "Hey, little Wang Yi, what do you mean by this? I don't deserve a reward for nothing. How could I dare to stop you from pretending to be Chang Yi?" This stupid girl was clearly holding a grudge. He did take advantage of her yesterday, but she didn't think about it. If he hadn't happened to be here, would she still be able to stand here and bicker with him today? He spent a lot of effort to find such a cute little rabbit for her, hoping that she would be appeased. But not only did she not appreciate it, she even mocked him. "It's for you, so you should take it." Pang Zhao's face darkened as he took 2 steps forward and was about to shove the little rabbit into Qin Yining's hands. Qin Yining stepped back and refused to accept it. "I don't want it. You can keep it for yourself." Pang Zhao's face darkened, and a storm gathered in his eyes. He nodded and said, "Okay, you don't want it, right? Then I'll throw it to death." As he spoke, he raised his arm and pretended to throw the rabbit to the ground. Qin Yining jumped in fright and hurriedly tugged at his sleeve. "What are you doing? You're simply being unreasonable. You're the one who refused a toast and insisted on drinking a forfeit." Pang Shao lowered his raised arm and handed the chubby little rabbit to Qin Yining. "Here, take it." Qin Yining reluctantly took it. It was a soft and warm ball in his hand. The little guy shifted in his palm, and his black eyes looked at Qin Yining with a very pure gaze. Qin Yining felt his heart soften, and he couldn't help but smile. He hugged it with one hand and stroked its back with the other. Pang Shao thought for a while and then took off the jade pendant from his waist. He took off the small red plum ribbon on it and walked to Qin Yining. Pang Zhao's hands was bent over, and bent over his head, tied, and was about to ask him what he was doing. He bent down, and their cheeks were very close. He didn't look up at her, and focused on tying the bow in his hands. From Qin Yining's angle, she could see his beautiful long eyebrows and long eyelashes when he lowered his head. She couldn't help but frown and look away. "Its name is Bai. This king gave it to you as a token of the peace talks between Dezhou and Dian. If you don't take care of it and treat it badly, this king will treat today's peace talks as null and void." Qin Yining widened her eyes and stared at Pang Shao in disbelief. "Wang Yi is too childish. Whatever you say. Anyway, this king, Bai, is yours. Do as you see fit." Qin Yining remembered that this person had once said that she looked like his Bai. He said that Bai was a pug, and that they had a watchdog named Dehei. Now, this little rabbit was called Bai. Qin Yining really wanted to laugh at the Pang family's naming skills if it wasn't for the occasion. But now, she just wanted to scold Pang Shao for being unreasonable. Wasn't he the god of war who killed people like scything flax? Why was the Pang Shao she knew completely different from the one in the rumors? This person was simply a temperamental madman. She lowered her head and looked at the little rabbit wearing a small red plum tassel around its neck. The little rabbit moved into a comfortable position in her hand and looked at her with its big black eyes. Pang Shao stood in front of Qin Yining with his hands behind his back. He admired the big and small soft rabbit in front of him as if no one else was around. He couldn't help but smile. In his eyes, she was just like Airby, soft and obedient. He just wanted to hold her in his arms and caress her hair. Qin Yining looked helplessly at Qin Huayuan. Qin Huayuan and Cui Wenqing were also watching Qin Yining. Qin Huayuan's eyes were calm. No one could tell what he was thinking. Cui Wenqing's face was full of understanding. Qin Yining knew that these people must have misunderstood. Because of Pang Zhao's tyrannical behavior, and now that he had given her this kind of token, she was forced to put Pang Zhao's label on her. If the peace talks were successful, even if she could return to the capital unscathed, the next thing that awaited her would be the fate of being sent to Pang Zhao. This kind of fate of being manipulated really made her feel helpless. Lian Xingjie felt a wave of anger when he saw that Pang Zhao had used a cheap rabbit to win Qin Yining's favor. He looked at Qin Yining, who was dressed in plain clothes and had a snow-white fur coat around his collar. He was holding a little white rabbit in his fair and jade-like hands. He really looked like Chang Yi. He couldn't help but be mesmerized. What a pity, what a pity. It was his biggest loss that he couldn't have a chance to have sex with a beauty. He wanted to take a closer look, but Pang Zhao had already walked in front of him and blocked his line of sight. Lian Xingjie was so scared that he almost fell from his chair. He had been traumatized by Pang Zhao's beating. The muscles on his face were twitching, and the wounds on his body were hurting terribly. He wished that he could cover his head with his hands to feel a sense of security. However, he was still the Minister of War. Only the heavens knew how much effort Lian Xingjie used to stabilize himself and not make a fool of himself. Pang Zhao stood in front of Lian Xingjie with a faint smile. He was enjoying the sight of Lian Xingjie wishing that he could drill his head under the table. After a while, he said, "Official Lian, have you finished the negotiations?" "This official is the commander-in-chief. I am the one in charge of this peace talk." Meeting Pang Zhao's intimidating gaze, Lian Xingjie couldn't help but swallow the rest of his words. Official Lian has delayed the emperor's important matters this time. During the peace talks, you have repeatedly made excuses. This king will definitely report you. You dare to bite back. Lian Xingjie said angrily, "It was clearly you who beat this official first. Why do you want to impeach this official? This king beat you. Who saw it? Who can testify for you? It was clearly your own actions that were improper. You failed to take liberties with a woman from a good family, and instead, you were chased and beaten by her father and brother. Official Lian is already so old. You should take care of your family's reputation. You have embarrassed yourself in front of the Yan dynasty. If you aren't ashamed, how are your children going to live?" Bullshit. That day, this official's deputy general clearly saw it. "Is that so? Then it's up to you. For now, let's use the seal." Pang Zhao leisurely sat down at the side. He leisurely picked up a cup of tea and took a sip. Lian Xingjie was so angry that his entire body trembled. It took him a while to react. Why didn't his deputy general appear these past few days? Thinking of Pang Zhao's usual style of doing things, the hair on Lian Xingjie's back stood up. That deputy general couldn't have been, now that he was at the front lines, it would be easy to explain if someone died unjustly. If he was killed, perhaps Pang Zhao would be able to find all kinds of reasons to convince your majesty. If it was someone else, they would be afraid. After all, he had a high position and power. If he wasn't willing to restrain himself, wouldn't that be like a bird waiting to stand out? However, Pang Zhao was different. He didn't do things according to common sense. His temperament was treacherous and changeable. Sometimes he was steady, sometimes he was cunning. He could pretend to be an elegant scholar, but he could also be a scoundrel. This person was simply an unfathomable pain in the neck. Lian Xingjie's heart was cold. He no longer hesitated and used his personal and official seals on the peace treaty. Qin Huaiyuan and Cui Wenqing heaved a huge sigh of relief when they saw that both parties had stamped their seals on the 2 copies of the treaty. Pang Shao also smiled. He crossed his legs and said, "That's good. In the future, we won't fight anymore. We'll resume trade and diplomatic relations and live a peaceful life." He turned around and smiled wickedly at Qin Yining. "This way, this king can visit your Dian and see what the rich and populace of Dian looks like." Qin Yining's face turned red from his smile. He cursed in his heart, "You're talking like a human, but that's not a human's expression. You're just a dandy." Qin Huaiyuan stood up and exchanged some pleasantries with Lian Xingjie and Pang Shao. After exchanging some pleasantries, they bid each other farewell. Pang Shao looked at Qin Yining and said, "You have to treat Bai well." Qin Yining rolled his eyes at him. He lowered his head and stroked the rabbit. "What kind of name did you give it?" "One poor, two white, one poor, two white. Haven't you heard of it before?" Pang Shao was stunned. He crossed his arms and thought for a moment. "Now that you've said it, it doesn't sound good. What do you think it should be called?" Qin Yining felt that this person was extremely boring. Not only did he tie the rabbit up, he even gave it a name. However, he also felt that he was being nosy. He actually fussed over the name of the rabbit with an idiot like Pang Zhishi. Qin Yining carried the rabbit and turned to leave. "Forget it. I'll call it Bai." Pang Shao chuckled and chased after him. "Ah! Do you also think that this king's name is good?" Qin Yining didn't even bother to look back. The tiger army looked at him as if they were looking at a monster. Pang Shao finally regained his composure. He regained his composure and ordered his men to break camp. Huzi followed beside him. He had been holding back his laughter for a long time. At this moment, he didn't dare to laugh out loud. He lowered his head and followed Pang Shao into the distance. The Dian people cheered thunderously when they heard that the peace talks had come to an end. A group of people prepared to break camp. Qin Huaiyuan and Cui Wenqing brought Qin Yining back to the city first. When they came, they were determined to die. Their hearts were heavy. When they returned, everyone was laughing and jumping for joy. It was even more joyous than the new year. Qin Huaiyuan had already sent someone back to deliver a message. Therefore, when everyone arrived at the city gates, General Wang Hui and Magistrate Lu had already opened the gates. When the people heard the good news that the peace talks had come to an end, they all rushed over as if they were attending a temple fair. They lined the streets to welcome and cheer loudly. The news that little Wang Yi had fallen in love with Grand Preceptor Qin's daughter at first sight spread throughout Xihua City as if it had grown wings. Everyone knew that Miss Qin had followed Grand Preceptor Qin to the military camp. She had been chosen by little Wang Yi at first sight. That pervert Lian Xingjie had no chance to get close to Miss Qin. Chapter 115. Bing Tang and Song Lan listened to Qin Yining's recount of the events of the past few days and were stunned. So that means that young Master Yao is Dezhou's Prince Zhongshuan? The rumored homicidal maniac who drinks raw meat and drinks blood. Bing Tang's eyes widened. Qin Yining nodded. But it seems that he is not like the rumors. Oh my God! I actually had so many chances to kill him with a single needle. Bing Tang spun on the spot. No wonder his aura is different from ordinary people, and he has such powerful martial arts skills. But I don't understand. Grand Preceptor Qin is clearly the person who killed the Protector General of the country by sowing discord. Thinking about it, you are little Wang Ye's enemy's daughter. His hatred for his father's murder is irreconcilable, yet he still treats you so differently. This is really puzzling. Song Lan stroked Qin Yining's little rabbit and smiled. Then what else do you not understand? Even heroes have a weakness for beauties. Our Lady is born with such beauty. Not to mention others, even those who serve her every day can't help but take a few more glances at her, let alone little Wang Yi. Lady, look at how thoughtful little Wang Yi is. He even sent you a little rabbit to accompany you. This little rabbit is really cute. Airbai seemed to understand Song Lan's praise. It rubbed its little head against Song Lan's palm and turned its little butt, wanting to jump off the bed. Qin Yining bent down to put it down and saw Airbai hopping to the door. It looked like it wanted to go out but couldn't. It wants to go out. Bing Tang curiously went forward and opened the door for Airbai. Airbai hopped out of the room, shaking its little round butt. A moment later, Bing Tang returned with Airbai in her arms. She said with a smile, young Prince Pang really knows how to send gifts. Is this little rabbit a spirit? You even know to go to the toilet by yourself. The soft, cute, and furry little animal was very likable. Not only did Qin Yining like it, but Bing Tang and Song Lan also liked Airbai very much. After carefully cleaning Airbai, they carried it back to Qin Yining. Qin Yining hugged Airbai and looked at the bright red plum blossom fringe on its neck. She thought of the arrogant man who had bent down and gently tied the fringe around the little rabbit's neck. She couldn't help but frown and blush. Bing Tang and Song Lan looked at each other. Bing Tang smiled and said, "Miss, don't think too much. Didn't you say that everything will be fine when it comes to it? Previously, we thought that the future of this peace talk was bleak, but didn't we come here safely? Moreover, I'll be honest with you. Please don't be angry with me." While speaking, Bing Tang squatted down beside Qin Yining. She touched Airbai's head with one finger and said, "I think young Prince Pang is not a bad person. Now there are many rumors in the city. If it's about you and Lien, I can't wait to kill that lecher. But if it's about you and young Prince Pang, I think you two are a perfect match." Song Lan nodded in agreement. "That's right. Little Wang Yi has saved your life time and time again. This time, he didn't just save your life at the immortal Taoist temple. If it weren't for little Wang Yi stirring up trouble in the military camp, you wouldn't have been able to escape from little Wang Ye's evil clutches. Even if the Grand Preceptor had protected you, the Emperor would have blamed you. After he stirred up trouble, who would the Emperor blame?" Qin Yining's face turned even redder after hearing their words. They didn't see how excessive this person was. She couldn't tell others how Pang Xiao had molested her and how he had forcefully kissed her. Although that person had a bad mouth and always liked to tease her, he still acted like a gentleman. She didn't expect that he would reveal his true colors in the military camp. He really looked like a devil incarnate. Seeing that Qin Yining was blushing and didn't speak, Song Lan and Bing Tang also tactfully kept quiet. After all, women in this world were weak. For a woman like Qin Yining, her future was never up to her. If they said too much and changed the young lady's character, what if fate had other arrangements in the future? Wouldn't they be sad? The two ordered people to prepare hot water for Qin Yining to wash up. Qin Yining declined the dinner party set by Magistrate Liu and fell into a deep sleep. She was so worried in the military camp that she couldn't eat or sleep for several days. This time, she slept soundly and didn't wake up until dawn the next day. Qin Huayuan and Cui Wenqing had a discussion and decided that they shouldn't delay in Xihua City. They sent people back to the capital early to deliver a letter to the emperor and tell him the good news of the successful peace talks. They only slightly reorganized themselves before leaving Xihua City. When they left, the common people lined the streets to send them off. Some people even shouted the name Wise Pannin. Qin Yining, Bing Tang, and Song Lan sat in the carriage. They couldn't bear the excitement outside and curiously lifted the curtains to look outside. Bing Tang said in a low voice, "The two of us didn't do anything, but we can bask in the glory of Master and Miss and have a taste of being loved. This is the fox borrowing the tiger's power. When Qin Yining heard this, she gently held Bing Tang's hand. Bing Tang had a hard life. The Tang family didn't survive. If they could survive, the common people would love and respect Imperial Dr. Tang. Bing Tang seemed to understand what Qin Yining was thinking, so he smiled brightly at her. Song Lan had been looking outside the whole time. At this moment, he suddenly said, "Miss, look, isn't that little Wang Yi outside?" Qin Yining leaned over and looked in the direction Song Lan was pointing. She saw two men holding horses behind the convoy. They were wearing ordinary cotton cloaks and half of their faces were covered by the fur collar. Looking carefully, who else could it be but Pang Xiao and Hu Zi? What were the two of them doing? As if sensing Qin Yining's gaze, Pang Xiao, who had a cold face, looked at the carriage. The moment his eyes met with Qin Yining's, he suddenly grinned. Qin Yining's heart trembled when she saw his smile. She put down the warm curtains. Pang Xiao touched his nose and his face became cold again. He practiced smiling in front of the bronze mirror for a long time. It can't be this ugly, right? In the carriage, Song Lan said, "They disguised themselves and followed us out of the city. Are they going to the capital? I'm afraid that's not good." Unconsciously, Qin Yining stroked Airbai from head to toe, stroking its fur. After a while, she finally calmed down her heartbeat and said, "Now that the peace talks have succeeded, Great Zhou has withdrawn its army from its seclusion, and the diplomatic relations between the two dynasties have been restored. Even if they were to walk freely in the land of Great Yan Dynasty, no one would find fault with them." Bing Tang said, "Perhaps it's just on the way. Miss, don't take it to heart. As long as they don't have any ill intentions, there's nothing to be afraid of." Song Lan heard this and nodded. The convoy left Xihua City and sped up. Qin Yining observed them several times, and found that Pang Xiao and Hu Zi hadn't caught up with the team. She found it strange that these two people's speed was so slow. But she didn't think too much about it. When they came, they felt that the road ahead was long and bumpy. On the way back, everyone was anxious to return home. Even their footsteps were much lighter. The journey that took them 2 days on the way back only took a day and a half. On the afternoon of the 29th, the group of carriages arrived outside of Jingdou. The emperor knew that the peace talks had been successful and that everyone was on their way back. He had already arranged for eunuchs to wait in front of the city gates. When they saw Qin Huaiyuan's group, the eunuch, who was wearing an iron-gray eunuch uniform, respectfully bowed. He smiled and said, "Grand Preceptor Qin, Official Chui, the Emperor's order is for you to set up camp outside the city for the night. Tomorrow morning, the Emperor will hold a welcoming ceremony and will personally lead all the officials out of the city to welcome you." Qin Huaiyuan smiled and said, "Yes, I'll have to trouble eunuch to convey the Emperor's words to me. I deeply admire the Emperor's painstaking efforts. Grand Preceptor Qin, you are the Emperor's trusted aide. It is only natural that the Emperor values you." The eunuch looked at the carriage at the back of the convoy and smiled. The Emperor also ordered for Grand Preceptor Qin to arrange for Miss Qin to enter the city first. After all, there will be many people at the ceremony tomorrow. Was the Emperor afraid that people would gossip behind his back? Was he using a woman to negotiate? However, Qin Huaiyuan wanted nothing more than to send Qin Yining back first, so that his daughter would not be under everyone's suspicious and speculative gazes. Therefore, Qin Huaiyuan smiled and said, "The Emperor is indeed thoughtful. I would never have thought of this. I will immediately order people to send my daughter into the city." "Many thanks, eunuch." The eunuch respectfully bowed to Qin Huaiyuan and Chui Wenqing, then took his leave and returned to the palace to report on the completion of his task. Qin Huaiyuan and Chui Wenqing ordered people to set up camp outside the city. They also arranged for about 10 people to escort Qin Yining back to the mansion first. When you see the Dowager Madam, please comfort her. Tell her that father will return to the mansion after the ceremony tomorrow. Qin Huayuan instructed Qin Yining. Daughter understands. I won't let the Dowager Madam worry. Qin Huayuan nodded and said, there are some things that can be said during the peace talks, and some things that can't be said. You have to be careful. Daughter knows what to do and won't speak carelessly. After all, this is a secret of the imperial court. Qin Yining agreed with a smile. Qin Huayuan knew that Qin Yining was very intelligent, so he felt relieved and smiled. Fortunately, we all came back safely. The days ahead will be good. There is still hope. Yes. Qin Yining looked at Qin Huayuan and couldn't help but smile. After this trip to negotiate, Qin Yining had a deeper understanding of Qin Huayuan. His admiration for his father had also deepened. After exchanging a few words with Qin Huayuan, Qin Yining boarded the carriage and led his people into the capital. When they passed by the Cloud Treading Inn, Qin Yining alighted and went to see Master Zhong. When Master Zhong saw that Qin Yining had returned, he was so happy that he knelt down and kowtowed to all the gods and Buddhas in the sky. I'm relieved that young lady is back. Qin Yining helped Master Zhong up and smiled. I've troubled you these past few days. Did anything big happen in the capital while I was away? Nothing else. I just heard that the Crown Prince had a big quarrel with the Duke of Ning. The Duke of Ning was so angry that he chased the Crown Prince out of the mansion. Our people only heard the private conversations of the customers and didn't know whether it was true or not. In any case, everyone was saying that the Crown Prince's brain wasn't clear. He only had one backer, but he actually made a big fuss about it. How could he compete with the Demon Empress in the future? Qin Yining thought of the Crown Prince's absurd behavior on the day of the trip. When he combined it with what Master Zhong said, there was nothing he didn't understand. He couldn't help but say, it's hard to say if the Duke of Ning was reliable in the past. Master Zhong was also a shrewd person. He understood with one sentence. He smiled and nodded, then said seriously, there's one more thing. It's about your mansion. Chapter 116. Shopkeeper Zhong said, if it were anything else, it would not be this lowly one's turn to know. It's just that this matter is very important. I also heard from the customers that the Empress sent an imperial decree to summon your mother a few days ago. Qin Yining turned pale with fright when she heard this. Her white cheeks seemed a little pale. Qin Yining knew the temper of the Sun clan very well. The Sun clan was a group of people who would cause trouble for no reason, not to mention the relationship between the Chao family and the Ding general manor. If the Empress didn't find trouble with the Sun clan would inevitably have a verbal conflict with her. Moreover, the Empress summoned the Sun clan for no reason. It was impossible that she had good intentions. Qin Yining asked anxiously, how is my mother? We really don't know. But I think it won't be a big problem for the Empress to summon someone like Madame Grand Preceptor. Qin Yining nodded and took a few deep breaths to calm down. She was a little anxious to go home. Someone is waiting for me outside. I'll go back to the manor first. It's not good to keep the elders in the manor waiting. Let's talk about business another day. Master Zhong nodded understandingly and politely sent Qin Yining to the carriage. Qin Yining was anxious to go home. She repeatedly urged the coachman to speed up. In fact, she was worried about the Sun clan when she set off for Xihua City. But at that time, she couldn't even protect herself. She didn't even know if she could come back alive. She couldn't care so much about other things. Naturally, she didn't have the spare energy to take care of the Sun clan. Qin Yining felt a little guilty. She was so complacent that she didn't go home immediately after returning to the city. She even had the mind to check on her property first. Bing Tang and Song Lan saw Qin Yining's serious expression. They thought something bad might have happened to the magistrate, so they were a little worried. The carriage sped all the way back to Qin Mansion. When the gatekeeper saw that it was Qin Yining who came back, he was momentarily stunned. Song Lan and Bing Tang were also quick-witted. They instructed these people to bring the soldiers who had returned from the escort to drink wine. They also sent someone inside to report to Old Madam. Only then did the doorman react and order someone to rush in to pass on the message. Qin Yining handed over the escorts to the steward and instructed them to reward them. Then, he brought Bing Tang and Song Lan to Old Madam Xiao Garden. Meanwhile, in Xiao Garden, when Old Madam received news of Qin Yining's return, she couldn't sit still. She put on a cloak with large sleeves and quickly walked out with Mammy Qin's support. Qin Yining had just passed through the hall of Xiao Garden when he saw the old madam draped in a tea-gold-colored cloak embroidered with longevity patterns. "Grandmother. I my sister E." Old madam sped up her footsteps. However, her small feet couldn't walk fast. When she walked too fast, she took 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. Her body was also somewhat swaying, causing her gold and jadeite hair ornament to also shake. It reflected her luxurious and jeweled appearance. "Grandmother, granddaughter is back." Qin Yining came close, lifted her skirt, and knelt down. She first saluted the old madam in a proper manner. Old Madam supported Qin Yining with both hands and repeatedly said, "Good, good, it's good that you're back. Where's your father?" Qin Yining smiled and said, "Father is still outside the city. He ordered me to come back first." When she heard that Qin Huayuan had also returned safely, Old Madam beamed with joy and said, when they came to reply, "I thought that this group of little monkeys were coaxing this old woman. I didn't expect you to really come back." The head maidservants Ji Xiang and Ru Yi, as well as the other maidservants and senior servants in the courtyard, were all at the side. When they heard this, they all laughed and came forward to salute Qin Yining. The scene was very lively. Old Madam pulled Qin Yining's hands and looked him up and down. She didn't find any clues, so she said, "Come in with grandmother first to talk." She then instructed Mammy Qin, Lujuan, quickly send someone to tell Lao, and the maidservants that Sister E is back. Tell them to quickly come over. Dinner will be here. Yes. Mammy Qin agreed with a smile. Old Madam held Qin Yining's hand and went up the stairs into the room. Naturally, there were maidservants who helped the two take off their cloaks. They bypassed the carved screen and went to the inner room. The two sat down on the Arhat bed with a red mattress by the window. Old Madam instructed Ji Xiang to bring a brass hand warmer for Qin Yining. She also asked the maidservants to serve tea and snacks. Then, she asked, "Why didn't your father come back with you? How did the peace talks go?" When she saw Qin Yining, she asked about Qin Huayuan twice in a row before asking about the peace talks. How could Qin Yining not understand what was most important in Old Madam's heart? She had long understood Old Madam, so she didn't get angry. She smiled and said, replying to grandmother, "Father and Cui Darren of the Ministry of Rights were ordered to set up camp outside the city. The Emperor's decree is to hold a grand welcoming ceremony tomorrow morning. He will lead the officials to personally welcome Father and his party into the city to celebrate the success of the peace talks." When Old Madam heard this, she clapped her hands and smiled from the corners of her eyes. "Good, good. Did your trip go smoothly?" Replying to Old Madam, everything went smoothly. Father's talent is outstanding. Granddaughter only needed to watch from the sidelines. Father successfully completed the peace talks. It's really admirable. By saying this, Qin Yining was telling old madam that she didn't have a place to use her talents this time. She was still a virgin. At the same time, she praised Qin Huayuan and also indirectly flattered old madam. Qin Yining finally saw through it. Old madam was selfish and snobbish. She was very ruthless to everyone. Perhaps all her love in this lifetime was used on Qin Huayuan. Praising Qin Huayuan made old madam happier than praising her. Sure enough, old madam beamed with joy and nodded repeatedly. She said to Mammy Qin, Ji Xiang, and Ru Yi, who were beside her, "Your first master was different from others when he was young. He was extremely intelligent. Now, he was able to complete such a major task, restore peace to the other two countries, and prevent the people from suffering. It's really a great contribution. The history books will also record this down carefully. He's really worthy of being my family Qin's son. Isn't it because old madam taught him well?" Mammy Qin also took the opportunity to praise old madam, making old madam laugh complacently. While they were talking, the sound of disorderly footsteps came from outside. The door curtain was lifted, and second madam and third madam came in with the young ladies of their respective branches. Qin Yining stood up and swept her gaze over everyone. She didn't see the Sun clan's figure. Her heart was in suspense, but she still smiled on the surface and greeted second madam and third madam, second aunt, third aunt. "Sister Yi, you're back." Second madam and third madam greeted her with a smile. In fact, in their opinion, Qin Yining's reputation was ruined the day she left the city. Now that she was back, they couldn't find the right attitude to face her. The two of them secretly sized up Qin Yining, wanting to see if there were any changes in her. Qin Yining could also see the awkwardness of her sisters in the family. She also saw old madam's expression of wanting to ask but being too embarrassed to directly ask. She suppressed a fire in her heart. She smiled and asked, "Why don't I see my mother? Is her body not feeling well again?" When everyone heard this, they all fell silent. Chapter 117. When the Dowager Madam met Qin Yining's gaze, her expression became somewhat awkward. She smiled placatingly at her and said, "Sister Yi, come sit next to grandmother." Qin Yining's heart skipped a beat. She calmly sat next to the Dowager Madam and looked at her with her large, clear eyes. When the Dowager Madam saw her clear and pure gaze, a sense of guilt arose in her heart. She held Qin Yining's slender and fair hand with her dry hand and patted it. When the elderly's hand was wrapped around Qin Yining's hand, she couldn't help but want to pull her hand back. However, she forced herself not to move. When the Dowager Madam saw her being obedient, she said with a gentle expression, "Sister Yi, don't be anxious. Your mother went to the palace a few days ago. Mother is still living in the palace at this time." "That's right. However, you don't have to worry. Your concubine Chao went with your mother. It's good for her to live in the palace and relax so that your mother won't be on the verge of death all day. This time, your mother and concubine Chao can have a good chat." Was this even something a human would say? Qin Yining's heart was instantly filled with anger. The blood in her chest seemed to have turned into magma and surged through her veins. Her face instantly turned red from anger. She forced herself to maintain her composure and said with a smile, "So that's how it is. Did Her Highness the Empress summon us?" As she said this, she sized up everyone's expressions. She saw that second madam and third madam were looking down and didn't say anything. However, her cousins' expressions were clear at a glance. They were all somewhat embarrassed and worried. Qin Yining understood that the Empress probably didn't summon the Sun clan. They probably entered the palace for other reasons. However, the Dowager Madam didn't feel embarrassed at all. She smiled and said, "Don't worry. Your concubine Chow also wants to get along well with your mother. She also takes pity on your maternal family and knows that your mother is depressed. That's why she wanted to bring her into the palace to relax. So that's how it is. Concubine Chow is really a considerate person. Qin Yining's voice was still as calm and gentle as usual. How many days has mother been in the palace? When old madam saw that Qin Yining didn't fly into a rage like she had imagined, she liked it a lot. She smiled and said, "The second day after you left, your mother went to the palace." I got it. Qin Yining thought for a moment and understood the whole story. The origin of this matter was most likely due to the fact that old madam wanted to curry favor with Chao Shi. She wanted Chao Shi to bring the Sun clan into the palace to torment them as she pleased and humiliate the Sun clan in order to elevate Chao Shi. However, there was another point that old madam might not be able to think of. Qin Yining smiled warmly and said, "I presume that before concubine Mother Chao entered the palace, she also greeted Her Majesty the Empress." Without waiting for anyone to answer, Qin Yining stood up and said, "This time, my father and I went out to participate in the peace talks. It's the same as His Majesty putting the burden of Dian's survival on my father's shoulders. Although we are a rich and populous village, we have been in deficit for many years. At this time, we are like a weak woman who has lost the ability to resist walking in front of bandits with a big bag of silver. Not only can we not protect the silver, we also can't protect ourselves. My father is a peerless talent and his reputation is widespread. Old madam, what do you think His Majesty is most afraid of when he allowed my father to go out for peace talks?" When Qin Yining spoke, his back was ramrod straight. Although there was a smile on his face, his aura was very intimidating. When everyone looked at him, they all thought of Qin Huaiyuan, who usually had a stern face. Although Qin Yining didn't mix in the officialdom, his wild nature of being able to survive even when he was an enemy of wild beasts didn't add any deterrence to her. Old madam looked at Qin Yining's face and thought of what Aiko had said to her before. Her expression changed in an instant. She stared blankly at Qin Yining. Her face, which was originally full of smiles, gradually turned pale. She said with lingering fear, "What His Majesty is afraid of is naturally," she didn't say the rest, but everyone wasn't stupid. They all understood what she meant. Second madam and third madam looked at each other. Qin Huaining, third young miss, and the others also had serious expressions. "Correct." Qin Yining said with a smile, "His Majesty is worried that my father will defect to the enemy at the last moment. Naturally, he will think of a way to restrict my father." "What is my father's biggest restriction? Could it be only my mother?" Qin Yining slowly walked in front of the old madam and said with a smile, "However, fortunately, my father and I succeeded in the peace talks, and I returned safely. The family's crisis can also be resolved." She looked at the old madam with a penetrating gaze, then looked at the two aunts. She then said with a smile, "Otherwise, whether it's someone who wants to take advantage of my father's absence in the capital or someone who wants to take advantage of my absence in the capital, they won't be able to obtain what they want. Let's not talk about whether what my father and I have will be difficult for others to obtain. Just by looking at the fact that we are all members of the family Qin, our lives are tied together. Isn't it obvious that when the nest is overturned, no eggs can remain intact?" It wasn't that Qin Yining had the heart of a villain. It was just that these people's surprise and hostility towards her return were too obvious. The family Qin hadn't been separated yet. Qin Huaiyuan was the eldest son of the eldest branch, and he was the backbone of the family Qin. Second uncle was the second son of the first wife. He was also an official, but his position wasn't high. He had always been suppressed in the imperial court. Third uncle was the son of a concubine. He was in charge of business and was the economic lifeline of the family Qin. When Qin Huaiyuan was present, the second and third branches each had their own duties. But if Qin Huaiyuan wasn't here, the second and third branches would become restless. The second son of the first wife felt that he could inherit the family business. The son of a concubine felt that he was the economic lifeline. Why should he give the money he earned to others? They didn't dare to talk about splitting the family in front of Qin Huaiyuan, but behind the scenes, everyone had made a lot of calculations. As for her, without mentioning anything else, if she wasn't here, the Zhaoyun agency in their hands would be a big fat piece of meat. She and her father knew that the emperor wanted the Zhaoyun agency, but the people in the family didn't know. Perhaps seeing her come back alive, those who had fantasized about the ownership of the Zhaoyun agency would be very regretful. Qin Yining's gaze fell on Qin Huaining. Qin Huaining would definitely be regretful because Qin Huaining believed that she was Qin Huaiyuan's adopted daughter. She had also once called Duchess Ding as her maternal grandmother. If she wasn't here, then naturally another granddaughter would take over the things that her maternal grandmother gave her. And now that the Sun clan had seen through Qin Huaining's sinister schemes, they naturally wouldn't allow the Zhaoyun agency to fall into Qin Huaining's hands. Therefore, the existence of the Sun clan was a stumbling block to Qin Huaining's plan. These simple-minded people, who only saw the petty benefits in front of them, didn't think that if the peace talks failed, or if she and Qin Huaiyuan didn't come back, they would probably lose their lives. What else could they scheme against them? Qin Yining wasn't saying alarmist words to scare them. Instead, he uncovered these reasons and let them think about it themselves. If they could become more afraid the more they thought about it, then it could be considered a punishment. The old madam's face was snow-white. Even second madam and third madam's expressions were very awkward and unsightly. Qin Huaining's face was even more snow-white. She pursed her lips and stared blankly for a moment. When she saw Qin Yining looking at her, she didn't show any weakness and waited. However, her hand that was constantly wringing her handkerchief betrayed her nervousness. At this moment, old madam finally understood. So you're saying that Madame Chow wants to bring your mother into the palace? Perhaps it's His Majesty's idea. It's most likely like that. Qin Yining smiled and said, after all, it's not good for His Majesty to directly take her into the palace as a hostage. If word of this spread, it'd be bad for his reputation. Originally, this peace talk had already attracted a lot of criticism. His Majesty isn't such a stupid person, so he borrowed Madame Chow's hand. That's right. It wasn't convenient for the Emperor and Empress to issue an edict, so they could only use Madame Chow's visit as a legitimate reason. This. I didn't expect Madame Chow's heart to not be with our family. The old madam looked like she had suffered a heavy blow. Qin Yining's expression didn't change as he said, seeking benefits and avoiding harm is human nature. Old madam, there's no need to be angry. Wasn't this exactly what the old madam had always done? Could it be that only the officials were allowed to set fires, but the common people weren't allowed to light lamps? After hearing Qin Yining's words, all the womenfolk in the room had solemn expressions. Second madam and third madam once again experienced the power of Qin Yining. They even had a thought that they couldn't face her directly in the future. In the face of the old madam, who didn't care about the many years of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship and allowed a concubine to bring her mistress into the palace to torture her, Qin Yining didn't make a fuss. He only analyzed the situation of the court, and it was enough to frighten people to the point that their faces turned deathly pale. They hated that they couldn't go back in time. This wasn't a threat or intimidation, this was a complete suppression of wisdom. Seeing the old madam's expression as if she had been struck by lightning, Qin Yining smiled and said, "Grandmother, don't worry. Now that father has returned safely, everything can be resolved. Presumably, Mother and Madame Chow will be able to return home very soon." Although he said that, how could the old madam trust Madame Chow in the future? She felt that she had been cheated of her feelings. Mammy Chin had been listening at the side for a long time and didn't have the right to interrupt. Now that the topic had finally come to an end, she smiled and came forward to bow and say, "Old madam, shall we have dinner in the warm room?" The old madam's face was ashen as she nodded. She looked like she had lost all interest. Chin Yining lowered his eyes and hid all his emotions under his long eyelashes. After the banquet, everyone returned to their own courtyards, each with their own thoughts. Chin Yining wore a small jacket and hugged Airbai as he sat cross-legged on the Arhat bed by the window. He frowned as he thought about something. Qiu Lu added a lamp into the room, brightening up the dimly lit bedroom. Song Lan and Bing Tang were filled with righteous indignation. They cursed as they sewed the soles of the shoes. How shameless! I have never seen such a person. She took advantage of our absence to bully madam. What kind of person is she? Qiu Lu sighed and said, that can't be helped. Without Missy around, madam doesn't have a backbone. Huaining Miss will only add fuel to the fire in front of the old madam. It's not like you don't know the old madam's temper. She will lose her sense of direction with just a few words. I think she will lose her sense of direction. Bing Tang used a needle to poke the soles of the shoes. Song Lan made a hush gesture and turned to look at Chin Yining. Qiu Lu changed the topic and said, Miss, while you were away, a few people from our master's study also left. Chin Yining came back to his senses and said with a smile, I found out that Lu Ye and the two maidservants are missing. Did they go to Snow Pear Courtyard? Chapter 118. Chin Yining had long seen that Lu Ye was not a well-behaved person. She was only by her side to go through the motions and did not serve her wholeheartedly. She originally thought that if such a person did not cause any trouble, it would be fine to just let her be. She did not expect that she would take the opportunity to leave. It's good that such a person left. Bing Tang said, this person is used to being stubborn. This servant saw that she was not a well-behaved person. It's good that she left, lest Miss gets into trouble for no reason. Chin Yining nodded and said, actually, quality is more important than quantity. In a large family like ours, having too many people would be more troublesome. Miss is right. Bing Tang and Song Lan both nodded. While the master and servant were talking, the voice of a young servant girl could be heard from outside. Chin Yining asked doubtfully, go and see who's here. Why is there someone here so late? This servant will go and take a look. Bing Tang put down her needle and thread and quickly went downstairs. Not long after, she returned and replied, Miss, a servant girl from old madam's courtyard came to pass on a message. Tomorrow morning, His Majesty will hold a welcoming ceremony. Old madam ordered people to book the second floor of Zuaxian restaurant, which faces the street. She said that she will bring the whole family to admire old master's charm. Chin Yining could not help but find it funny. The peace talks between De Zhou and Dian were successful. To the people in the capital who were already scared out of their wits, this was something even more joyous than the new year. Moreover, His Majesty attached great importance to this matter and even wanted to hold a welcoming ceremony to bring all the civil and military officials to welcome them. Old madam valued Qin Huayuan so much and loved vanity. They were probably not the only family who wanted to go and watch the show. At that time, there would probably be many noble ladies present. Indeed, when there was a chance to show off, she would not be careless. The Sun clan situation in the palace was still unknown, but old madam was only thinking about these things. When Chin Yining thought about how the Sun clan was treated like this after marrying into family Qin for so many years, he felt that it was not interesting. I understand. Since that's the case, let's rest early. Yes. Several people saluted and left Qiu Lu for the night. Bing Tang and Song Lan, who were tired from the long journey, went to take a bath and rest. Qin Yining didn't sleep well that night. Because he was worried about the Sun clan, his heart was always in suspense. He even woke up twice at night and had all kinds of uneasy dreams. However, when he woke up, he couldn't remember the contents of his dreams. He only felt very anxious and uncomfortable. The next morning, after Qin Yining had a simple breakfast, he went to Xixiao Garden to pay his respects. Today, old madam wore a very eye-catching red robe. Not only did she put on makeup, but she also wore a red headband inlaid with rubies. Even when the granddaughter and grandson of the family Qin held a wedding, old madam might not dress up like this. Second madam, third madam, and Qin Huining were chatting with her at the side. It was a lively scene. Qin Yining looked at Qin Huining's peach-colored 8-piece robe and expressionlessly sat down at the side. A person with a heart, even if they didn't say it, still had a heart. For a heartless person like Qin Huining, even if he said it 10,000 times, it still wouldn't change his mind. In any case, Qin Huining didn't care about the people of Duke Ding's household. Presumably, maternal grandfather, uncle, and cousins wouldn't care about how Qin Huining dressed in the underworld. Second master and third master arranged for a manservant outside to inquire about the news. At precisely 7 in the morning, someone came in to report, replying to old madam, His Majesty's Imperial carriage and Her Majesty the Empress's Imperial carriage are already near the city gates. All the civil and military officials are accompanying them. They will soon receive them. Old madam nodded repeatedly and said with a smile, Since that's the case, let's also set off. Let's take a detour to Zuetian restaurant first. That place isn't far from the city gates. The view from the second floor is excellent. We can see the entire group coming back. In the end, it's mother who is considerate. Third madam smiled and flattered. That's right. Grandmother's idea is excellent. We also want to see the glorious scene of father's return. This is truly an important matter that will bring glory to our ancestors. Qin Huining also echoed. When old madam heard this, it was as if she had eaten a happy fruit. Her entire body felt very comfortable and she couldn't help but laugh cheerfully. Qin Yining looked at these people laughing and chatting happily and felt even more irritated. In any case, they didn't have feelings in their hearts and didn't care about the Sun clan. They also couldn't be expected to care about the Sun clan's safety. Not long after, a servant came to report, the carriage has been prepared. Old madam, and young miss, please set off. Everyone dressed neatly and clustered around old madam like stars surrounding the moon. The group of people took a detour to Zuetian restaurant. Only then did they go upstairs and push open the lattice window on the second floor that faced the street. They saw that there were already commoners on both sides of the road who were craning their necks to look outside. In the crowded crowd, only black heads could be seen. Everyone had a smile on their faces as they cheerfully discussed. The line of commoners stretched in both directions and simply couldn't see the end of it. Normally, the womenfolk rarely came out. Even if they saw the sea of people today, it was still very interesting. The girls leaned against the window and watched while whispering to each other. Qin Yining stood by the window on the far right side. He could see the city gates with just a tilt of his head. She saw that the clean street extended to the front of the city gate. Suddenly, a person on a horse galloped over. That person was wearing an iron-gray eunuch's uniform. He shouted loudly, "The Emperor and the Empress have returned to the city." As soon as his voice fell, the sound of firecrackers exploded. Green smoke rose everywhere and red dust flew everywhere. The commoners all laughed happily and repeatedly applauded. The womenfolk of the family Qin restaurant couldn't help but crane their necks to look outside. At the large city gates, the Emperor and Empress walked at the front, followed by Qin Huayuan and the Crown Prince. Behind them were the civil and military officials dressed in neat official robes and arranged according to their ranks. Qin Huaiyuan, who was dressed in a red official robe and had a tall and straight posture, looked particularly out of the ordinary in contrast to the officials with varying appearances. Upon closer inspection, there was a bit of an immortal aura. The emperor wore a bright yellow dragon robe and held the empress, who was dressed in a red phoenix robe. Under the protection of the guards, they walked down the street and waved to the commoners on both sides of the road. It was unknown whether the commoners were doing it themselves or if they had already arranged for someone to take the lead. Suddenly, someone loudly shouted, "Long live the emperor! Long live the empress! The emperor is blessed and blessed. Today, the weather will be smooth." Following this, the commoners all bowed. The womenfolk of the family Qin restaurant all bowed when the emperor passed by the drunken immortal restaurant. They didn't dare to look directly at the emperor. The dowager duchess led the womenfolk to kneel on the ground. She continuously nagged, "He really is the son of our family Qin restaurant. His ancestors have accumulated merit and brought glory to our family Qin restaurant." Not only was the dowager duchess proud, Qin Yining also felt very proud. After all, to be able to reach Qin Huaiyuan's position as an official, his grace and glory had already reached the peak of his life. This was something that many people wished for but couldn't obtain. Who knew that just as Qin Yining was thinking this, he suddenly heard a commotion outside. He could faintly hear the cries and curses of the commoners. Chapter 119. The 20 or so assassins were all dressed as commoners. Today, there were so many people and the scene was so crowded that no one would pay attention to the assassins if they blended in with the crowd. In addition, they knew that the emperor would have arranged for a large number of troops to protect him. No one would have thought that someone would choose this time to assassinate him. The assassins held steel knives and clubs as they rushed out of the crowd and headed straight for the celestial empress. The imperial guards and the people from the warden's office of the 5 cities met the assassins head-on. The commoners had never seen such a scene before. They were so scared that they kept retreating, afraid that they would be implicated. However, there were too many people. The commoners pushed and shoved each other as they ran. Some people fell to the ground and were trampled by the people running for their lives. Before the assassins could kill the emperor, the commoners' lives were already in danger in the chaos. The dowager duchess was so scared that she screamed, "My Mengu, Heavens! Go and save them! Go and save them!" Qin Huaiyuan was very close to the celestial empress and the crown prince. Although they were heavily protected, the assassins' knives and swords were always aimed at them. Qin Yining was so scared that her face turned pale, and her heart almost stopped beating. The fatuous emperor and the demon empress deserved to die, but her father deserved to die. Qin Yining hated that she wasn't a man and didn't practice profound martial arts. Her little bit of brute force wasn't worth mentioning here. She could only watch as her father was in danger. The womenfolk screamed in fear, and the streets were in chaos. The adults screamed, the children cried, and the screams and shouts of fighting and killing were so piercing that it hurt one's eardrums. Qin Yining didn't scream like her cousins. Instead, she leaned against the window and stared at the situation on the street. At this time, a few assassins had already broken through the Imperial Guard's encirclement and were heading straight for the Celestial Empress. Qin Yining realized that these people's targets were the fatuous Emperor and the Demon Empress, not Qin Huaiyuan. Seeing this, Qin Yining was slightly relieved. If the Demon Empress and the fatuous Emperor died, this country might be able to recover its prosperity. However, she was afraid that the knives and swords had no eyes and would hurt Qin Huaiyuan. Just as he was thinking this, he suddenly heard a series of screams coming from the direction of the city gate. Qin Yining looked in the direction of the sound and saw more than 10 men dressed in Dezhou's military uniform rushing into the crowd, brandishing their swords and chopping left and right, not even sparing the common people. They rushed straight toward Qin Huayuan's direction, shouting, "Take down Qin Mang." The moment the Dowager Duchess heard this, her eyes rolled back and she fainted on the spot. Qin Yining clutched the window frames so tightly that he didn't even realize that his fingernails were bleeding. Looking at these people, Qin Yining was reminded of the people who had tried to assassinate him at the fairy temple. Both of them were equally tall, and their moves were equally ruthless. Although Qin Yining didn't know martial arts, looking at the masked men dressed as commoners and the people dressed in Dezhou's military uniform, it was clear that they were two different groups of people. Qin Yining didn't understand why Qin Huayuan, a person who had contributed greatly to the country and had always had a good reputation, would be assassinated after the peace talks were successful. The fatuous emperor and the demon empress should have died a long time ago, but her father shouldn't. Unless these people weren't dying people. Qin Yining had a flash of inspiration, and his expression became even more serious. The streets were in chaos. The commoners and the officials who were following behind them had already fled without a trace, and those who could hide had hidden in the shops on the side of the road. The two groups of assassins gathered in the middle, and they actually had the power to break through. Qin Yining saw that the imperial bodyguards and the people from the warden's office of the 5 cities were somewhat powerless, and cold sweat trickled down his forehead. If her father was really in danger, she would rather lose her life and rush down to save him. Suddenly, 10 people dressed in black embroidered robes and wearing silver masks with swords and sabers in their hands leaped over the city walls and leaped over the eaves and walls. Qin Yining saw these people and felt a chill in his heart. Were these people also assassins? Her father might not be able to keep his life. Just as Qin Yining was at his wit's end, these people split into 2 groups and rushed into the midst of the assassins. Like 2 black daggers, they actually suppressed the 2 groups of assassins and quickly gained an overwhelming advantage. These silver-masked men were clearly well-trained and had excellent martial arts. Moreover, among the 10 of them, there was even a petite and slender woman. While Qin Yining was still in shock, the 2 groups of assassins had already been slaughtered by the 10 people and the imperial bodyguards. Some were dead, some were injured, and most of them were captured alive. Qin Yining finally succeeded in controlling the situation, and he let out a sigh of relief. The emperor and empress had been scared into hiding in the crowd, and now they were finally relieved. The 10 silver-masked men quickly walked up to the emperor and bowed. The masked woman in the lead loudly said, "This subordinate came late to save you, please forgive this subordinate." The emperor patted his chest with lingering fear and waved his hand, "You can all rise. Fortunately, I am unharmed. If you dare to come late again, I will not let you off easily. Many thanks to the emperor for not killing us." The woman loudly replied and kowtowed. The other 9 people behind her also kowtowed. The emperor coughed and finally calmed down. "Take these assassins to the Ministry of Justice's prison and thoroughly investigate them. I would like to see who it is that wants to kill me." As soon as the emperor's voice fell, he heard a plop sound. He turned around and saw the men wearing Dezhou's military uniform all fall to the ground with purplish-black blood seeping out of the corners of their mouths. Just like at Xiangu Temple, they had bitten open their poison sacs and committed suicide. Qin Yining's brows furrowed as he watched. He was already certain that these people were not from Dezhou. The 2 countries had just reached an agreement, so how could Dezhou be so stupid as to send people to assassinate Qin Huayuan and ruin the peace talks? It had to be known that the money and cities promised by the Dian imperial court had not been sent yet. Qin Yining felt that he couldn't think of anyone who would send men of sacrifice to sow discord. The emperor angrily roared, "Rice buckets, a bunch of rice buckets. There are so many of you, so why can't you stop these people from committing suicide? I haven't even found out the truth, yet they are already dead. What use do I have for you? The assassins dressed as commoners were enlightened and followed suit, planning to bite their tongues. However, with the previous group of people's actions, the guards hurriedly dislocated the lower jaws of the assassins. There were a few who were quick to speak, but they only bit their tongues a little and didn't die. The emperor saw that there were still so many people left to investigate and let out a sigh of relief. Let's return to the palace. Leave this matter to the 5 cities' warden's office and the Ministry of Justice to investigate. I want to see the results within 3 days. Yes. Official Su of the 5 cities' warden's office responded with a bitter expression. Qin Yining furrowed his brows as he looked in the direction of Qin Huayuan. Fortunately, the danger was averted, and his father wasn't injured. The Dowager Duchess had been saved from being pinched. After confirming that Qin Huayuan was fine, she also let out a sigh of relief. Qin Yining watched as Qin Huayuan was about to get into the carriage. Only then did he remember that the Sun clan was still in the palace. She hurriedly led Bing Tang and the others downstairs. Just as she arrived at the entrance of Drunken Immortal Restaurant, her gaze met with Qin Huayuan, who was getting into the carriage. Qin Huayuan saw that Qin Yining was here and frowned slightly. He thought for a moment, then called over a small eunuch who was accompanying him and whispered a few words to him. The eunuch nodded repeatedly and turned to walk towards Qin Yining. Not to mention, 6th younger sister, you grew up at home and didn't see the hardships of life outside. During the peace talks between the 2 countries, father's heroic appearance when he argued with the scholars. This kind of scene should be recorded in the history books. Older sister isn't talented, but I have seen a lot more than 6th younger sister. As for courage, I'm also a bit braver. Using little tails to deflect 1,000 caddies, she drew everyone's attention back to the 6th young miss, who was so scared that she wet her pants. The 6th young miss face immediately turned red. She glared at Qin Yining, and tears quickly gathered in her eyes. Qin Yining hurriedly coaxed her, 6th younger sister, what's wrong? Don't cry. My father's success in the peace talks is glorious in the history books. This is a joyous occasion for our family. 6th younger sister, why are you crying? Or do you mind, that kind of thing? It doesn't matter. Don't take it to heart. Who would talk nonsense about your matter outside? Even if grandmother dotes on you, she won't let others talk nonsense. The 6th young miss was so angry that her tears flowed, and she began to sob. The more she said this, the more it proved that the news of the 6th young miss peeing her pants had already spread throughout the entire residence. Even if no one said it, everyone knew about it. Old Madam touched her aching forehead and angrily rebuked, all of you, behave yourselves. Such a big thing has happened, yet you still have the heart to bicker. You can't share the family's worries and only know how to cause trouble. What's the use of having a group of useless girls like you? Seeing that Old Madam was angry, everyone stood up and respectfully saluted her. Old Madam, please calm down. The 6th young miss also sobbed and saluted with everyone. Old Madam frowned. Just as she was about to reprimand them, Mammy Qin brought up the brass tobacco pouch and pot that had been filled with tobacco. Old Madam's attention was diverted, and she stifled her anger in her heart. After taking a few puffs, she felt a bit better. Qin Yining smiled at the right time and said, Old Madam, don't worry. I just met with father. At this time, father followed into the palace. Presumably, there's a banquet in the palace and he will return to the residence soon. At that time, you will naturally be able to reunite with father. She observed the old madam's expression and saw that although the old madam seemed to like it a bit, she was still frowning as usual. She then said, Our family is now in a situation where the fire is adding oil to the fire and the flowers are blooming. Father has made a great contribution this time, and His Majesty will definitely reward him. At that time, he will bring honor to the family. It's also old Madam who has taught your son well." These words made old Madam's heart feel a lot better. She took a few puffs from the tobacco pouch and said, "N." It could be considered that her anger had subsided. Seeing that Qin Yining coaxed old Madam to like it with a few words, everyone was relieved. Third Madam began to flatter her again, and everyone else followed suit. Only sixth young mistress cried with grievance. Qin Yining sat beside her and persuaded her in a low voice. From time to time, the two of them would raise their heads to look at Qin Yining and chatter for a while. Qin Yining didn't care about what they said about him behind his back. Only incompetent people who didn't dare to confront him head-on would gossip behind his back. Now that she had gone on a trip with her father, she had seen such a big battle and had also seen the bloodshed. She felt that her mind had been opened up a lot. This kind of trivial matter could no longer enter her eyes. It was only a matter of block soldiers with arms, water with an earthweir. She was now worried about her father and mother. Also, who was the one behind this assassination attempt? She didn't care whether or not someone wanted the dog emperor's life, and she also didn't care whether or not the demon empress died. What she cared about was those people who dressed up as Dezhou's soldiers to target her father. Would these people fail and try again? If the Dayan official who was in charge of the peace talks was assassinated right after the peace talks were successful, wouldn't it be a provocation to the Yan dynasty and Dezhou? The people of Dezhou would think that the Yan dynasty looked down on Dezhou or wanted to renege on their promise. The Dayan dynasty would also suspect that Dezhou wanted to tear up the peace treaty. If Dezhou and Dayan continued to fight, who would benefit from it? Would it be the Miaojiang that bordered Dayan? Or would it be the Taitan in the north of Dezhou? Percent at this time, there was no banquet scene in the palace as Qin Yining had expected. The imperial study was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Qin Huaiyuan knelt on the shiny black marble floor. His expression was solemn as he lowered his head. The emperor paced back and forth in front of Qin Huaiyuan with his hands behind his back. "Good job, good job. I have worked hard for this country for 35 years, and now I've been assassinated. Moreover, the people who tried to assassinate me were all these people. Your Majesty, please quell your anger." Qin Huaiyuan kowtowed. "Quell my anger? How can I quell my anger?" The emperor angrily grabbed the secret report that the silver-masked man had delivered and threw it in front of Qin Huaiyuan. "Let me see it for myself. How can I quell my anger?" Qin Huaiyuan's heart jumped. He lowered his head to read the contents of the secret report and was immediately shocked. His face instantly turned pale. "Your Majesty." Qin Huaiyuan bowed to the ground and kowtowed 3 times. "This official's family has always been loyal and devoted to Your Majesty. Even if Your Majesty wants this official to die, this official will not hesitate to do so. Your Majesty, please understand." Seeing that Qin Huaiyuan, who was usually like a celestial being, was really anxious, the emperor finally eased up a little. After thinking carefully, a smile appeared on the emperor's face. It was completely different from his previous anger. He gently helped Qin Huaiyuan up with one hand. "Beloved official Qin, you have always served the country wholeheartedly. Right now, your wife is a guest in the Empress Palace. You've also read the secret report. Those people dared to assassinate me, so I can't let them live. Now, as long as you accompany me in this play, I will be at ease. I will also reward you generously." Qin Huaiyuan felt his hands and feet go cold. Chapter 121. In Qin Manor, old Madam happily ordered people to prepare a sumptuous banquet. She also ordered people to guard the path that Qin Huaiyuan had to pass by every 50 steps. Once they saw Qin Huayuan's carriage, they would immediately enter the manor to report. Everyone stayed in Ci Shao Garden to chat with old madam. The joyous atmosphere was even livelier than the previous New Year's celebrations. Qin Yining naturally couldn't return to Shuoran Pavilion first, so he could only stay here to chat. However, this wait lasted for 4 hours. The sky had darkened, but Qin Huayuan still hadn't returned. Old madam became somewhat anxious. If there was a banquet in the palace, they wouldn't keep people here for so long. What kind of banquet needs to be held until so late? If the emperor wanted people to stay, he should at least consider the longing of his family after not seeing them for many days. In the end, old madam revered the emperor and didn't dare to complain. However, she had already criticized him 1,000 times in her heart. Third madam was the one who knew how to curry favor. Seeing old madam's impatience, she smiled and said, "Eldest uncle has made a great contribution that will leave his name in history. It's appropriate for the emperor to keep him here to chat. Only eldest uncle can have such an honor. If it was someone else, I'm afraid they wouldn't be able to receive such treatment in their lifetime." "That's right, grandmother." Qin Yining also joined in with a smile. "We're all family Qin people. It's easy to see father, but it's difficult for those officials and colleagues outside to talk to father. Why don't we take advantage of today's banquet to have a good chat?" Qin Yining had been the most doted on by old madam for more than 10 years. Ever since Qin Yining returned, he had suppressed her in every aspect. Now that she was once again at old madam's side, she was both emotional and excited. Naturally, she used all her skills to make old madam happy. In old madam's mind, the image of Qin Huayuan being the moon surrounded by stars appeared. When she thought of how her son had always been filial to her, her heart felt as if it had been soaked in a jar of honey, and she couldn't help but laugh heartily. Seeing that old madam was happy, third madam and Qin Huayuan laughed and joked with old madam. Sixth young miss, seventh young miss, and eighth young miss also joined in the fun, making old madam beam with joy. Qin Yining sat with the third miss, drinking tea and chatting in low voices. He didn't have the slightest intention of going up to her. Third miss was already engaged, and the day of her marriage was not far away. Moreover, she was usually aloof from worldly affairs. On the other hand, Qin Yining had seen through old madam's nature. She didn't want to beg for the pure familial affection that she had always longed for. In addition, old madam didn't like her and the Sun clan now. She wasn't the kind of person who would offer the right side of her face after being slapped on the left side. Just as the womenfolk in the room were talking and laughing, they suddenly heard a burst of hurried footsteps from outside, and a man's voice could be faintly heard. "It must be Meng Gu coming back." Old madam smiled and looked at the door. But when the door curtain was lifted, the person who came in was Qin Huayuan's Chang Sui, Qi Tai. Qi Tai entered the door and knelt down with a plop. "Old madam. Something has happened in the palace." Old madam and everyone's smiles froze on their faces. "Quickly say, what happened?" Replying to old madam, there was a big banquet in the palace. Laoi and madam also attended. The emperor rewarded Laoi. Because of Laoi's contribution in the peace talks, the emperor bestowed Laoi the title of Marquis of Anping. "This is a good thing," third madam said happily. Qi Tai kowtowed and said, "It's a good thing," but the empress then said that a hero like Laoi should have beauties to serve him. She chose Lu Jiayu and Su Kairen from the emperor's palace and bestowed them to Laoi. She said that they were for bearing children. These two were favored by the emperor, and the emperor didn't object when he heard it. First madam rejected the empress in public. Then the empress quarreled with first madam. The empress said that first madam was a jealous woman. First madam insulted the empress as a demon empress, destroyed other people's families, and killed loyal people. All kinds of words were extremely sharp. In anger, the Empress ordered people to kill First Madam, saying that she wanted to give her poisoned wine. The room was silent, and everyone's faces were pale. Qin Yining's mind was buzzing. She carefully looked at Qi Tai's face, trying to find a flaw in his words and expression. But Qi Tai's anxious and worried look was not fake. If it was said that the Sun clan's resentment towards the Emperor and Empress was really not small. But the people of the Sun clan, even if they were full of resentment, they did not have the courage to insult the Empress in person unless they were forced to. The grudge between the Duke Dinggua's mansion and the Chao family was not new. Even if the Sun clan hated the Empress these days, they could see the Empress when they went to the palace to pay their respects on the first day of the new year, but she did not see any discord between the Empress and the Empress. On the day she went out, the Sun clan had also lived in the palace for a while, and nothing happened during this time. It was clear that after the Sun clan suffered enough in the mansion, they had recognized the reality. What's more, the Sun clan's heart was full of Qin Huayuan. Qin Yining sometimes looked on coldly, and even felt that although the death of all the men in the Duke Dinggua's mansion was a big blow to the Sun clan, it was not as big as the blow that Qin Huayuan took Madame Chao as a concubine. A woman like this who was wholeheartedly devoted to her husband was just given 2 palace concubines. After returning home, they could eat and drink well and be raised well. Qin Huayuan had concubines, so why would the Sun clan insult the Empress in the palace? Could it be that there was something fishy going on here? But the matter had already happened, and she couldn't have the slightest bit of luck. Qi Tai, carefully explain the scene at that time to me. Qi Tai hurriedly nodded and said, replying to 4th young miss, I didn't see the scene at that time. It was after the incident inside that the master ordered an eunuch to come out and pass a message to me. I saw that the eunuch who passed the message was silent like a cicada in winter and didn't dare to say a word. I guessed that Her Highness the Empress had a very big temper. You also know that His Majesty has always doted on Her Highness the Empress and can't bear for Her Highness the Empress to suffer any grievances. This time, eldest madam really. No one could stop her from seeking her own death. Qin Yining rubbed the space between his eyebrows in pain and whispered a few words to Song Lan beside him. Song Lan nodded. Taking advantage of the fact that everyone in the room was still in shock and didn't notice her, she circled around them and left the old Madame Ci Shao garden. Lifting her skirt, she quickly ran out. Qin Yining turned around and bowed to the old madam. Grandmother, what do you think should be done with the current situation? What should be done? The old madam was finally able to recover from her shock. The brass tobacco pipe in her hand angrily knocked on the table, knocking off a large piece of paint from the black inscriptions on the small table. Your mother, that ignorant and stupid woman. She dared to hoot in front of Her Highness the Empress. Even if she wants to die, she shouldn't have harmed others. Let her die. It's better if she dies. Although he had long expected that the old madam would have such a reaction, Qin Yining's heart still felt numb and twitching pain when he heard such heartless words from the old madam's mouth. It was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head in the middle of winter, freezing him from the inside out. Grandmother, even if mother is impulsive, it's also because of her sincerity towards father. Moreover, she has been our family Qin's daughter-in-law for more than 20 years. Even though she's your daughter-in-law, it's also equivalent to half a daughter to you. Shut up. The old madam interrupted Qin Yining's words and reprimanded, half a daughter. What a nice way to put it. If I had such a daughter, I would have drowned her in the toilet long ago. Such an ignorant idiot, such a slut who deserves to be hacked to death. She can't do anything well and can't even give birth to an egg. She actually wants to harm my son. Even if she dies, she shouldn't think about implicating the lives of our family Qin. Qin Yining pursed his lips and his gaze turned cold. Old madam, do you really not care about the many years of friendship? I don't have any friendship with the one surnamed Sun. The old madam waved her hand fiercely and glared at the second foreign who was about to open her mouth to plead for mercy. Qin Yining nodded and said, Old madam, even if you want to clear your name now, I'm afraid that you won't be able to do so. If you go and plead for mercy for my mother, not only will you not harm yourself, but you will also gain a virtuous reputation. The Empress wants to kill my mother, but as her mother-in-law, you don't have any reaction at all. Aren't you afraid of being ridiculed by outsiders? What a joke. I'm already so old, why would I care about what others think? Your father said that you have brains, but why do I see that you're completely muddle-headed? It's good that your mother is dead. In the future, you won't lack women with high positions to call your mother. Madame Chow is better than the one surnamed Sun in every aspect, you. Enough. Qin Yining couldn't bear it anymore. She couldn't hit the old madam and had nowhere to vent her anger, so she immediately kicked over a round-backed chair by her feet. That round-backed chair fell to the ground with a crash and knocked over the small table next to it. The blue and white porcelain lid and teapot on top fell to the ground with a sharp sound of porcelain breaking. Rebellion, rebellion. Someone come quickly, drag her out, drag her out. No need to trouble yourself. I can leave by myself. Qin Yining coldly said, Old madam is so heartless. Aren't you afraid that others will be sad? Heaven is heartless, but it will always leave a chance for survival. Even if my mother made a mistake, her crime doesn't deserve to die. My father just succeeded in the negotiations and was even conferred the title of Marquis of Onping. Do you think that the Emperor will allow my mother to die like this? Even if the Empress doesn't care about the outside world's comments, the Emperor is still a person who cares about his face. Old madam's fearful appearance is really eye-opening. Qin Yining threw down this sentence and turned to leave. However, her words were like slaps to the old madam's face. Now, she also began to have some doubts. That's right, with the Emperor's personality that cherished his reputation, would he allow the Empress to kill the Sun clan? Murdering the wife of a meritorious official, if this spread out, it wouldn't be good. However, the Emperor had also done a lot of things in the past that involved murdering meritorious officials. The old madam couldn't react for a while. When she came back to her senses, she discovered that Qin Yining had already left the main room. She was suddenly startled and shouted, Someone come, stop her. With Qin Yining's bad temper, she was afraid that she would go out and cause trouble. Everyone came back to their senses and rushed outside. There were also servants on duty in the courtyard who wanted to stop Qin Yining. However, these people were only domesticated dogs. How could they be a match for a wild wolf? Qin Yining only wanted to save people now. Even if she didn't have enough ability, she wouldn't give up hope at this time. She had to try her best. The people who dared to stop her were all easily knocked down by Qin Yining. The dozen or so servant girls and women didn't manage to stop her. The old madam, second madam, and third madam stood in the corridor with the young ladies and saw Qin Yining's barbaric appearance clearly. Everyone was once again stunned by her skills. The old madam shouted, Quickly, quickly go and catch her. Don't let her go out. Seeing that Qin Yining had come out, she hurriedly waved at her. Bing Tang lifted her skirt and ran over to support Qin Yining. Miss, are you all right? Thanks to Sister Song Lan calling for me, the two of us slipped out while no one was paying attention. Just now, we saw a lot of people rushing towards the second gate. We were worried that Miss wouldn't be able to break out. Don't worry, they won't dare to touch me. While they were talking, Qin Yining arrived in front of the carriage. Master Zhong, let's get in the car first. We'll talk on the way. Yes. Qin Yining smiled gratefully at Master Zhong. He had Bing Tang and Song Lan sit with the driver outside, leaving Master Zhong to talk in the carriage. The carriage quickly rushed in the direction of the imperial palace. Inside the carriage, Master Zhong was still a bit reserved. Qin Yining smiled and said, "Master Zhong is an elder, so I'm just talking to the head shopkeeper." The word elder woke Master Zhong up. They were old enough to be grandfather and grandson, not to mention they were master and servant. No one could criticize them. Master Zhong relaxed and said with a serious expression, "I've already sent people to inquire about the matters in the palace. It's true that the eldest madam of the honored Fu had a direct conflict with the empress and was sentenced to death in a fit of anger. She hasn't been executed yet, so she should be locked up somewhere. We need to wait for the emperor's orders." Qin Yining frowned and said, "Is there really such a thing? Does Master have suspicions about this matter?" "At first, I did have suspicions. No matter how muddle-headed the emperor is, he still cares about his face. My father just came back from a successful peace negotiation for him. How could he kill the wife of a meritorious official in the blink of an eye?" Master Zhong shook his head and said in a low voice, "Our emperor's actions can't be judged by ordinary people's style. In order to protect himself, the emperor didn't even care about his face. Could it be that he hadn't done enough to harm the loyal and good?" Qin Yining's brows were almost twisted into knots. He said anxiously, "Master Zhong, do we have a way to save my mother's life? Do we have any connections in the palace? Master only has to give orders. As long as I have the ability to do it, this old man will not refuse. Moreover, Zhao Yun Agency's connections are Master's connections." Master Zhong smiled when he said this. "Before coming, I heard about the matters in the palace. I guessed that Master wouldn't just stand by and do nothing. He would definitely think of a way to save the eldest madam. Therefore, I've already arranged for people to bribe the guards at the gate. When the time comes, we'll get the clothes of the eunuchs and think of a way to sneak in and steal the eldest madam out." Qin Yining looked at Master Zhong's wrinkled but smiling face that was very affectionate and sincere. His nose was sour and his tears almost flowed down. Master Zhong was an outsider, but he was still able to think of a way for her without caring about his own safety because of her previous efforts. Old Madam had been with her mother for nearly 30 years, but she was still so cold-hearted. The coldness in the Fu was already beyond Qin Yining's imagination. With a comparison, it was easier to see who was close and who was distant, and who was reliable. The carriage was narrow, but Qin Yining still bowed to Master Zhong. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness. Master, you mustn't do this." Master Zhong hurriedly supported him and said, "If it wasn't for Master, my family would have already been taken revenge by those people from Qinglu. My family would have been ruined and my family would have been destroyed. Perhaps the grass on my grave would have grown a foot tall. How could I still sit here and talk to you? It's not my style to not repay kindness. Master, you don't need to be so polite with me in the future." Qin Yining used his sleeve to wipe the tears from the corners of his eyes and said, "Okay, I won't mention it again in the future. What is Master's plan after saving her? If someone is lost in the palace, there will definitely be a thorough investigation. I can only arrange for my mother to escape. As for me, I can't leave. At that time, there will be a separation." Qin Yining was somewhat downcast, but in the blink of an eye, he pulled himself together. "But no matter what, as long as I'm alive, there will be a day when we meet again." Master Zhong nodded when he heard this. He admired Qin Yining's tenacity and indomitable character when he was in danger. While they were talking, the carriage had already arrived at Gue Lin Lu, the restaurant closest to the palace under Zhao Yun Agency. At this time, there were still many diners in Gue Lin Lu. Qin Yining didn't dare to show his face in public, so he first went to the rear courtyard to wait for news. Who knew that not long after, Master Zhong would come back with even more despairing news with a serious expression. Master, our people just found out that not long after you left Qin Manor, someone from the palace went to pass on a message. The matter with First Madam has become serious. Instead of being sentenced to death with poisoned wine, it has been changed to being publicly displayed outside the gate at noon tomorrow. Qin Yining's mind exploded when he heard this. The white porcelain cup with a lid fell from her jade-white hands and landed on her legs. The hot tea splashed all over her legs and then fell to the ground with a sharp shattering sound. Miss! Bing Tang and Song Lan hurriedly came forward and checked her skirt for fear that she would be scalded. Fortunately, it was winter and she was wearing thick clothes. Otherwise, if this cup of hot tea splashed on her legs, she would have been scalded. Master Zhong sighed and said, "Master, don't be too sad." Qin Yining took a few deep breaths and forced himself to calm down. His voice trembled slightly as he said, "Master Zhong, have you heard the reason for this? The method of being sentenced to death with poisoned wine could be announced as a sudden death to the outside world. It could still be considered as preserving the dignity after death. However, the punishment of being publicly displayed outside the gate at noon didn't even give the person a chance to cover it up. Being publicly displayed was different from beheading. Beheading was just beheading. Being publicly displayed, however, was beheaded and hung the head high on a wooden pole for public display. This was the punishment for great villains. What crime did the Sun clan commit? Master Zhong said, "It said that First Madam insulted His Majesty and called him a fatuous ruler. She said that His Majesty specialized in killing loyal people and that he should have died earlier." Qin Yining covered his forehead. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. No matter how strong she was still a young girl who hadn't reached marriageable age. Even if she had seen the fickleness of human nature, when faced with such a big matter, it was still difficult for her to make a decision. Where's my father? Has my father returned to the Fu? Her father must have a way to save her. Master Zhong shook his head. "I haven't heard any news of Grand Preceptor Qin returning to the Fu. Could it be that her father was implicated and locked up?" Qin Yining stared straight at the flickering candlelight. He supported his forehead with his hand and was lost in thought. Although Bing Tang and Song Lan were anxious and angry, they didn't dare to speak carelessly and disturb Qin Yining. They could only anxiously stand to the side. After a moment, Qin Yining's gaze became firm. "No matter what, I can't watch my mother die." Even if she scolded the incapable ruler and was suspected of disobeying her superiors, it was only because she spoke the truth. The decline of Duke Ding's Fu was unjust. The incapable ruler did this because he was ashamed of being scolded and became angry out of shame. But the more he does this, the more people will scold him. "Yes, Madam is right," Master Zhong said in a low voice, "but what can you do, boss? No matter what, I have to try my best." However, Master Zhong can't participate in the following matters. "You just have to help me ask around in the underworld if there are any brothers in the underworld who are willing to risk their lives for my mother if we offer a large sum of money. I believe that with a large reward, there will be brave men. As long as there is enough money, there should be some chivalrous men who can't stand the incapable ruler's actions. You want to raid the execution ground?" "Yes." Qin Yining nodded. Master Zhong pondered for a moment and nodded. "Our Zhaoyun agency doesn't have much, but we do have connections. I will immediately ask around." "Boss, you can rest for now. We will do our best. You don't have to strain yourself too much." Qin Yining said gratefully, "You have to be careful this time. Don't get involved and implicate yourself. If there is anything, just push it to me. When the people are hired, you don't have to participate in this matter. Just focus on being the head shopkeeper of Zhaoyun agency." "Miss, what are you saying? I, old Zhong, am not the kind of person who forgets favors. I know the head shopkeeper's character. But you're not alone. You still have a family to take care of. Listen to me. Don't get involved in this matter. Just instruct a few more people and go around to hire people. Master Zhong opened his mouth, but swallowed his words in the end. He nodded heavily and quickly walked out. Bing Tang went to find a dress and helped Qin Yining change into it. Miss, don't worry. Rest for now. No matter what you do tomorrow, you have to conserve your energy to have the strength, right? Qin Yining pursed his lips and nodded. After a while, he said, you can all leave. I want to be alone. P.S. Yining, my mother, how can you say the truth? Pang Xiao, thinking of little bunny, I'm happy. Chapter 123. It was destined to be a sleepless night. When Qin Yining closed her eyes, she could see the bodies of the members of the Sun Clan. The floor was covered in blood, and the heads were hung high in the wooden cage. The pungent smell of blood seemed to be at the tip of her nose. How could she sleep peacefully? Qin Yining was lost in thought as she stared at the light blue gauze curtain. The candlelight outside the curtain was reflected on the curtain, forming a hazy, cross halo. The wind blew the window frame, and the candlelight flickered. She seemed to hear a woman crying. Qin Yining was shocked. She lifted the curtain and stood on the steps. The crying disappeared again. The room was filled with unfamiliar furnishings. It was pitch black in the shadows, as if there was a beast hiding there that could pounce on her at any time and devour her. Qin Yining rubbed her aching forehead and sat on the edge of the bed tiredly. She leaned her head against the bedpost and closed her eyes. With a creak, Bing Tang pushed the door open and came in with a lamp. He asked worriedly, Miss, why are you not asleep? What time is it? It's already Yinzheng. Bing Tang placed the lamp on the table, and the room immediately lit up. The beast hiding in the darkness was also driven away by the light. Miss, you must be so worried that you didn't sleep the whole night, right? How can I sleep after such a big thing happened? Bing Tang put 3 of her fingers on Qin Yining's wrist. After checking her pulse, she said, Miss, there's nothing wrong with your body. I'll prepare some appetizers for you later and drink some water. You'll be fine in 2 days. But do you have any abdominal pain today? Qin Yining nodded. Yes, I do have abdominal pain. My hands and feet are very cold. Miss, you had a cold before. Now that your menstrual period is coming, you will naturally have abdominal pain. But don't worry, I will help you adjust your body in the future. In less than a year, you will be cured. Miss, you have a good body. It will not affect your fertility. Qin Yining was surprised. What are you talking about? When Bing Tang saw that Qin Yining's brows had finally relaxed, he deliberately joked, it's just natural etiquette. It's not a bad thing. We, who study medicine, have seen through all of this. We are not those fake Taoists. You're so talkative. Qin Yining had almost forgotten that Bing Tang girls were actually the same age as her. Miss, please lie down for a while. This servant will be back soon. Thank you. Qin Yining smiled gratefully. Originally, her mother should have been the one to tell her these things, but she had heard some things from Nanny Jean and Mother Jean. Now, Bing Tang was taking care of her. She was glad that she had Bing Tang and Song Lan to accompany her. If she was alone, she wouldn't know what to do. Not long after, Song Lan and Bing Tang came back together. The Sun Clan's mother was kneeling on the stage. When she saw Qin Yining being stopped by the soldiers of the 5 cities warden's office, she couldn't stop her tears from flowing down. As she struggled, she repeatedly shook her head at Qin Yining, as if she had something to say to Qin Yining. However, because her lips were pouted, she couldn't say anything and could only anxiously cry. When Qin Yining saw her mother like this, she couldn't care less about reason. She pushed away the soldiers in front of her and was about to charge forward. However, this was an execution ground after all. No matter how strong Qin Yining was, she was still a woman. She was pulled back by the soldiers and thrown into the crowd, where she fell to the ground. Young Miss Qin, we respect Grand Preceptor Qin. Please reconsider your actions. This is an important execution ground. You can't just barge into it. Qin Yining gritted her teeth and stood up with the help of Bing Tang and Song Lan. There were so many soldiers, but she had only found 4 people. Could she succeed? At this moment, the crowd of onlookers surged again. It was as if someone was pushing and shoving from behind, pushing the people in front a few steps forward. Only then did Qin Yining realize that there were a few tall men around her. These people were dressed like ordinary people. They looked ordinary, but their bodies were very strong. Qin Yining couldn't help but feel puzzled. Could it be that she had hired these people? No, they didn't know who the real employer was. They wouldn't come to her side at all. It's noon. Begin the execution. The executioner shouted loudly. The scene instantly fell silent. The Sun Clan's mother shook her head repeatedly. Snot and tears flowed down her face as she sobbed. The executioner took the prisoner's token and threw it on the ground. Then, he raised the ghost head knife high. Qin Yining's heart was in her throat. She looked around for the people she had hired. At the front of the crowd, there were already more than 10 men preparing to rush out. At this critical moment, there was suddenly a sharp sound of something breaking through the air. With a ding sound, the ghost head knife was broken in half by an arrow. The executioner fell to the ground. The arrow didn't slow down at all. It was nailed to the round log that supported the tent behind the executioner. It sank into the log, leaving only the tail of the arrow visible. The executioner turned pale with fright. He shouted in shock, "Who dares to cause trouble? Quickly arrest them." The 10 men who were about to act stopped. "Show this king's flag. Let them see who I am." Hearing the familiar voice, Qin Yining turned around in shock. They saw Pang Xiao, who was wearing a splendid purple python robe and a black mink fur cloak, was sitting upright on a tall and big horse with shiny black fur, leading a dozen or so valiant tiger army soldiers. As if they were pushing the mountain and parting the sea, they walked toward the crowd. The common people on both sides of the street immediately dispersed. The red banner with the character swastika, and the valiant tiger army's black banner with the character swastika, were waving arrogantly in the wind. Qin Yining, Bing Tang, and Song Lan were protected by a few tall men. They followed the crowd and retreated to the sides, making a path for the sudden arrival of the troops. Pang Xiao urged his horse forward. He held a large bow in his hand. His eyes were filled with arrogance. "What? You dare to kill my mother-in-law right after the peace talks? Go ask your emperor if he still wants to start a war." Chapter 124. Pang Xiao's voice was deep and pleasant to the ears. He didn't seem to be shouting, but his voice still traveled far and wide. His last carried a strong sense of threat, causing everyone present to keep quiet out of fear. The previously noisy Meridian Gate was now very quiet. Only the sound of the banners being blown by the wind could be heard. The commoners retreated in fear, leaving a large empty space. The men beside Qin Yining seemed to have completed their mission as they disappeared into the crowd. The delicate girl with 2 servant girls stood in front of the commoners, making her seem like a crane in a flock of chickens. Pang Xiao first looked at Qin Yining, then raised his eyebrows and smiled at her. He then looked back at the executioner. The executioner quickly walked over with his subordinates. He asked in a dry and hoarse voice, "Are you Dezhou's Prince Zhongshuan?" As soon as he finished speaking, Pang Shao lashed out with his horse whip. With a crisp paw, the tip of the whip landed on the executioner's shoulder, causing him to cry out in pain. "Who do you think you are? Who gave you the right to speak to this king? Call your emperor over." Pang Shao dismounted from his horse and threw his large bow and horse whip behind him. Huzi hurriedly caught them. The executioner covered his bleeding shoulder and gasped in pain. He hurriedly called for someone to return. Pang Shao strode towards Qin Yining. When the commoners saw how arrogant he was, they were angry, but didn't dare to say anything. They looked at Pang Shao with suppressed anger in their eyes. Even if their dying emperor was an incapable ruler, it wasn't up to the people of Dezhou to bully them in their territory. However, Pang Shao seemed to enjoy this kind of gaze. He raised his eyebrows and looked at the executioner. The executioner was so scared that he retreated again and fell to the ground in a panic. He was in such a sorry state that people couldn't bear to look at him. Pang Shao laughed happily. The commoners also felt that their country's officials were too cowardly and began to discuss in low voices. Pang Shao walked in front of Qin Yining and took off the sable fur cloak on Qin Yining's shoulders. "Look at how cold you are. You must be frightened, right?" There was a smile in his voice, and his eyes were filled with concern. "Wang Yi, please don't worry about me." Qin Yining raised his hand to take off his cloak, but was stopped by Wang Ye's large hand. "You've only been back for a few days and you've already become so haggard. Looks like I shouldn't have let you back then. What a good old dog Yuchi, you even dare to bully this daddy's woman. I can't even bear to lay a finger on her, yet she's been bullied to this extent after just a few days back in the capital." Qin Yining furrowed his brows and looked up. His eyes met with the wild and murderous look in Qin Yining's eyes. He couldn't help but tremble in fear. He quickly broke free from Qin Yining's grasp and took 2 steps back. He took off the warm cloak that carried his scent and tossed it to Qin Yining. "I don't remember when I was so familiar with Wang Yi. Prince Zhongshuan, please conduct yourself with dignity." After being rejected by her twice in a row, Pang Xiao's expression became cold. He rushed over here because he was afraid that she would be bullied, but she was so good. She was so cold to him and didn't even give him any face. What did she think he was? With his brows tightly knitted and his eyes cold, Pang Xiao suppressed his anger as he glared at Qin Yining. His anger was about to explode. Qin Yining's body tensed up from being stared at like she was being stared at by a wolf. She didn't doubt that Pang Xiao could break her neck at any time. But she couldn't show any weakness at this time. Although she was grateful to Pang Xiao for saving her time and time again, she was also angry at him for speaking such nonsense and taking advantage of her, as well as implicating her in his relationship with him. The emperor was very suspicious. If he accused Qin Huaiyuan of treason, the Qin family would follow in the footsteps of the Sun family. How could she dare to show that she was willing? Moreover, between them, it was Pang Xiao who had always been overbearing and forceful. She pursed her lips and stared at him without backing down. It was like she was staring at a lecher who had offended her. Pang Xiao looked at her small face that was as thin as a palm. She was clearly very weak, but still wanted to challenge him. All of his anger disappeared. He went forward again and put the cloak on Qin Yining's body with a calm face. His large hand tied a bow on the collar as he said through gritted teeth, "If you don't know what's good for you again, this king will immediately take you back." His voice wasn't loud, but everyone around him could clearly hear him. What's more, his purple robe was dazzling under the sunlight. His handsome face was suppressing his anger, and his tall figure was bent slightly to accommodate her height. His large hands, which were used to take people's lives, were now helping this little girl tie her cloak. This scene was too pleasing to the eye, but it was also too strange. The people's discussion became even louder. You! Qin Yining felt like she was being stared at. Her originally pale face became even paler and her lips trembled. What about you? This king also has a temper. Don't use your beauty to challenge this king's bottom line. What kind of words were these? She was a pure and innocent girl who had never seduced him, but he said this in front of everyone. Even if she jumped into the Yellow River, she wouldn't be able to clear her name. Qin Yining was so angry that her brain was buzzing and her vision turned dark. She couldn't sleep the entire night and was anxious and angry. In addition, she was in a period of unbearable pain. Under these attacks, Qin Yining, who thought that her body was made of iron, suddenly blacked out and fell down. What happened to you? Pang Shao was startled by her sudden fainting. He hurriedly extended his arms to catch her. He held her in his arms and patted her cold cheeks with his big hand. Then, he put his hand on her cold forehead and asked Bing Tang anxiously, "What happened to your miss?" Bing Tang angrily glared at Pang Shao and scolded in a low voice, "You're so angry that you fainted. You still have the nerve to ask." Pang Shao lowered his head to look at the person leaning on his shoulder and couldn't help but feel guilty. Her face looked even paler against the black sable and purple robe. Her long eyelashes cast shadows under her eyes. Her entire body was soft and obedient. His heart softened and he lost his temper. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have been so fierce to her just now. At this moment, the sound of horses and carriages came from not far away. Pang Shao carefully picked up Qin Yining and placed him on the military carpet laid out on the ground in Huzi. He handed him over to Bing Tang for treatment and turned to look at the people coming with his hands behind his back. The emperor, who was dressed in bright yellow, quickly walked over with the empress, crown prince, and Qin Huaiyuan surrounded by palace servants. The commoners were all stunned. They didn't expect that with just one sentence from Wang Yi of Dezhou, their Dian emperor would really bring his wife and son over. The commoners were extremely disappointed with the incapable ruler, but they had no choice but to bow and shout "Long live" 3 times. There was no one else in the emperor's eyes. He only saw the young man with an imposing aura that was like an unsheathed blade. The young man's gaze was like a knife, cutting him until he felt cold all over. The emperor, who had always been tall and valiant, seemed a bit hunched in front of Pang Shao. "This is your Majesty of Dian. This king greets you." Pang Shao cupped his hands in greeting. His attitude was extremely perfunctory. The emperor didn't care at all. He smiled and said, "Prince Zhongshuan's fame has spread far and wide. Even this emperor has heard of you in the capital. Seeing you today, the rumors are indeed true. How come Prince Zhongshuan has the time to come to the capital of Dian today?" Pang Shao sneered and said, "The peace talks were successful, and Zhou and Yan are on good terms. This king originally thought that there would be no need for war in the future and that the 2 countries would have good relations. Who would have thought that when he entered the capital, he would see such a big show? May I ask if your Majesty of Dian was dissatisfied with the peace talks, so he killed the wife of the official who was in charge of the peace talks in the blink of an eye?" Such arrogant and direct words made the emperor's forehead break out in cold sweat. Small show.